A single sharp sound cut through the hushed murmur of the first-class cabin on Horizon Airways Flight 217 from London to New York. It wasn't the clink of crystal or the pop of a champagne cork. It was the raw, ugly sound of flesh meeting flesh. Every head turned. There in the aisle stood Diane Miller, a senior flight attendant with a face like thunder, her hand still raised. Before her, recoiling in stunned silence, was Dr. Zoe Williams, a passenger, whose only provocations were her dark skin, her serene composure, and the gentle swell of her 7-month pregnancy. In that frozen moment, nobody knew the shocking truth. The woman who had just been slapped was married to the man who signed every single one of their paychecks. Zoe Williams asked, her voice soft but clear as she gestured to the spacious first-class suite. Her 7-month pregnant belly was visible beneath her elegant maternity dress, a simple navy blue design that complemented her warm brown skin. The gleaming interior of Horizon Airways Flight 217 from London to New York was a masterpiece of luxury design. The first-class cabin resembled a 5-star hotel more than an airplane, with private suites featuring sliding doors, handcrafted leather seats that converted to fully flat beds, and polished wood surfaces that reflected the ambient lighting. The gate agent checking Zoe's boarding pass nodded respectfully. "Yes, Dr. Williams. Welcome aboard." His eyes flickered briefly to her name on the manifest, a momentary hesitation that Zoe had become attuned to, recognizing that split second of recalibration when someone encountered her title and had to adjust their initial assumptions. Zoe thanked him and made her way to her suite. At 36, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years as one of the nation's leading pediatric cardiothoracic surgeons. The medical conference in London, where she'd just delivered the keynote address, had been a triumph but exhausting. Just a few more hours, she whispered to herself as she settled into the plush leather seat. She placed a protective hand over her rounded belly, feeling the reassuring movement beneath. Zoe arranged her carry-on items, placing her medical journal on the side table and her phone in the charging port. She slipped off her comfortable but elegant flats and reclined slightly, finally acknowledging the bone-deep fatigue from the past days. Through the window, she watched ground crew moving efficiently around the sleek body of the Airbus A350. The plane represented everything her husband had envisioned when he purchased the struggling airline, cutting-edge technology wrapped in understated luxury. Zoe's thoughts drifted as the remaining first-class passengers boarded, the honeymoon couple giggling as they explored their adjoining suites, a silver-haired executive arranging his briefcase with practiced precision. Across the aisle, a man in his mid-30s with a casual tech entrepreneur vibe was already typing furiously on a slim laptop. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage, Dr. Williams?" A young Hispanic flight attendant with a name tag reading Lucia Rodriguez appeared at her suite entrance, offering a tray of options. "Just some sparkling water with lime." "Please," Zoe replied, appreciating the woman's warm smile. "Of course. And congratulations," Lucia added with a genuine glance at Zoe's belly. "My sister just had her second. They're such blessings." "Thank you." "First time for me," Zoe said, finding herself warming to the young woman's unaffected kindness. From the galley, a different flight attendant emerged. Older, with blonde hair pulled into a severe bun and a face set in professional detachment. Her name tag identified her as Diane Miller, head flight attendant. Her gaze swept the cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this job for decades. When her eyes landed on Zoe, something imperceptible shifted in her expression, a momentary flash of what? Surprise, confusion, disapproval. Whatever it was, it vanished quickly behind a mask of professionalism as she continued her visual inspection of the cabin. But Zoe had caught it. She'd become attuned to those micro-expressions over years of being the unexpected presence in exclusive spaces. The captain's voice came over the PA system welcoming passengers aboard Horizon Airways Flight 2170 non-stop service to New York's JFK International Airport. Estimated flying time 7 hours and 12 minutes. 7 hours. Zoe settled deeper into her seat. 7 hours, and then home. Excuse me, but are you sure you're in the correct seat? The question cut through Zoe's concentration as she reviewed a complex arterial switch procedure in her journal. She looked up to find Diane Miller standing at the entrance to her suite, tablet in hand, eyes coolly assessing. The plane had reached cruising altitude 20 minutes earlier. The seatbelt sign had just been turned off, and most passengers were settling in for the long transatlantic journey. The cabin lights had been dimmed to a soft glow, creating pools of warm illumination around each occupied suite. "Yes, I'm in the correct seat," Zoe replied evenly. "1A, as indicated on my boarding pass." She gestured to the digital boarding pass displayed on her phone. Diane's gaze flicked from Zoe's face to her casual but elegant maternity dress, then to her simple gold wedding band and the absence of flashy jewelry. It was a look Zoe recognized all too well, an evaluation and assessment of whether she belonged in this exclusive space. "We've had some last-minute manifest changes," Diane said, her tone professionally brisk, but underlined with doubt. "I'll need to verify your boarding pass against our system." Zoe unlocked her phone and held it up, displaying her boarding pass. "Here you are." Dr. Zoe Williams, Suite 1A. Diane barely glanced at it. "I'll need to check our manifest. There may have been an error at the gate." Without waiting for a response, she walked back to the galley. Zoe took a slow, measured breath, a technique she'd perfected during tense moments in the operating room. The memory of a similar incident during her second year of residency flashed through her mind. She'd been wearing scrubs, exhausted after a 36-hour shift when she'd entered the doctor's lounge. An older white physician had immediately asked her to bring him coffee, assuming she was janitorial staff. When she'd introduced herself as Dr. Williams, his face had registered the same momentary confusion she'd just seen in Diane's eyes, the cognitive dissonance of encountering a black woman in a space where he didn't expect to find one. The recollection was interrupted as Lucia approached with a warm smile. "Dr. Williams, would you like a warm towel before meal service begins?" "Yes, thank you," Zoe responded, appreciating the simple courtesy. Lucia handed her the towel on a small porcelain dish. "Is there anything else I can get you for comfort? Perhaps an extra pillow for your back. I know flying while pregnant can be challenging." The young woman's intuitive understanding surprised Zoe. "That would be wonderful, actually. The baby is pressing on my sciatic nerve today." "I'll bring one right away," Lucia promised before moving to the next passenger. From her suite, Zoe could see Diane at the galley workstation tapping at her tablet with evident frustration. The head flight attendant's body language was tense, her movements sharp and irritated. A few moments later, Diane returned her expression unchanged. "It appears you are indeed assigned to this seat," she conceded, though her tone suggested she still found something irregular about the situation. "Enjoy your flight." She turned away without waiting for Zoe's response, moving on to greet the silver-haired man in 2A with a markedly warmer smile. "Mr. Peterson, so lovely to have you with us again. Would you care for your usual Macallan 18? The contrast was subtle but unmistakable. It was another familiar experience for Zoe, the difference between being tolerated and being welcomed. Lucia returned with a plush extra pillow. "Here you go, Dr. Williams. This should help with the lower back pressure. Would you like to see our menu for today's meal service?" "Yes, please," Zoe replied, adjusting the pillow behind her lower back with immediate relief. As Lucia handed her the leather-bound menu, Diane's voice carried clearly from across the aisle. "The chef has prepared a special truffle risotto for our regular first-class passengers today. It's not on the menu, but I'd be happy to request it for you, Mr. Peterson." The implication hung in the air that there were regular first-class passengers, and then there were others. Zoe opened her menu and focused on the selections, determined not to let the microaggression affect her. Across the cabin, the tech entrepreneur in 3B was observing the interactions with interest. Alexander Costa, according to the luggage tag visible on his carry-on, had the keen awareness of someone who notices patterns. He'd glanced up from his laptop several times during Diane's interactions with Zoe, his expression thoughtful. When meal service began 20 minutes later, Zoe observed the precise choreography of first-class dining white tablecloths laid with expert hands, silverware placed just so wine glasses positioned at the perfect angle. Mr. Peterson in 2A received his appetizer first. When Lucia approached with Zoe's tray, Diane intercepted her. "I'll take care of 1A, she said, taking the tray from the younger woman's hands. "You finish serving the passengers in the center section." Lucia hesitated briefly, then nodded and moved away. Diane approached Zoe's suite with the tray but didn't immediately set it down. Instead, she stood there for a beat too long, as if reconsidering something. "Your salmon?" she finally said, placing the tray on Zoe's table with noticeably less care than she'd shown with Mr. Peterson's meal. The silverware clinked against the china and the water glass wobbled slightly. "Thank you," Zoe responded, maintaining her composure despite the obvious slight. Diane lingered her eyes, taking in Zoe's simple appearance once more. First time in first class? The question had a patronizing edge, a subtle implication that Zoe was out of her element. No, Zoe replied, simply neither defensive nor explanatory. She'd learned long ago not to justify her presence in spaces where others questioned her right to be. "Well, if you need any assistance navigating the suite features, just press the call button. Though I'm sure you know how that works." With that parting comment, Diane turned and walked away. Zoe unfolded her napkin and placed it across her lap, her movements deliberate and unhurried. This was familiar territory. The subtle dance of prejudice disguised as professionalism, the insinuations wrapped in courtesy. From 3B. Alexander Costa's gaze lingered on the interaction. His brow furrowed slightly. He reached for his phone, tapped something quickly, then returned to his meal. But his attention remained partially focused on the dynamics unfolding in the first-class cabin, his eyes occasionally darting between Zoe and Diane. Throughout the meal service, Zoe noticed Diane's continued attentiveness to the white passengers while delegating Zoe's needs to Lucia. It was textbook differentiated service. Nothing overtly discriminatory, nothing she could definitively call out, but a pattern clear to anyone paying attention. And Alexander Costa was definitely paying attention. His phone now rested on his tray table, positioned in a way that suggested it might be recording. Whether out of concern or curiosity, he had become an observer to the unfolding dynamic. Zoe reclined her seat slightly, allowing herself to breathe through the discomfort in her lower back. The baby shifted position, pressing against her ribs, a reminder of what truly mattered in this moment. In a few hours, she would be home continuing her life's work of saving children's hearts. The petty prejudices of a flight attendant were in the grand scheme inconsequential. Yet even as she thought this, she knew that such moments were never truly inconsequential. They were the visible symptoms of a deeper disease, one that would still exist when her son entered the world. And that knowledge sat heavy alongside the weight of her unborn child. "More passengers in first class requesting blankets," Diane announced, striding into the forward galley where Lucia was preparing the mid-flight refreshment service, and 1A is pressing the call button again. The subtle emphasis on again wasn't lost on Lucia, who glanced toward Zoe's suite with concern. This was the third time in 40 minutes that Diane had mentioned Dr. Williams with thinly veiled irritation. "I can take care of her," Lucia offered, reaching for a fresh blanket from the warming drawer. "No, continue with the refreshments. I'll handle it." Diane snatched the blanket and marched toward Suite 1A, her posture rigid with barely contained annoyance. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin had settled into the hushed rhythm of transatlantic travel. Most passengers were either watching films on their personal screens or resting with eye masks firmly in place. Only Alexander Costa remained fully alert. His attention divided between his laptop and the increasingly obvious tension between Diane and Dr. Williams. He had positioned himself strategically, angling his seat to maintain a clear line of sight to both women, while appearing focused on his work. Diane approached Zoe's suite with the deliberate slowness of someone responding to an inconvenience rather than a service request. "Yes," she inquired, not bothering to mask her impatience. Zoe looked up from her medical journal, her expression calm despite the discomfort evident in how she shifted in her seat. "I was wondering if I might have a cup of ginger tea. I'm feeling a bit nauseated. We serve tea with the refreshment service, which begins in 20 minutes. Diane replied curtly. "I can bring you some then." "I understand, but given my pregnancy, I was hoping. As I said, refreshments will begin in 20 minutes. Diane cut her off. "First class follows a service schedule just like every other cabin." At that exact moment, Mr. Peterson in 2A raised his hand slightly. Diane immediately pivoted toward him, her demeanor transforming instantly. "Mr. Peterson, how can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm and solicitous. "I'd like another whiskey when you have a moment," he said, barely looking up from his financial reports. Of course, right away, Diane replied, hurrying to fulfill his request without any mention of service schedules. The contrast was so blatant that several nearby passengers noticed. The woman from the honeymoon couple exchanged a glance with her husband. Alexander Costa's eyebrows rose as he continued his discreet documentation. From his seat, Alexander watched as Diane promptly delivered Mr. Peterson's whiskey, complete with a fresh bowl of warm nuts that hadn't been requested. She lingered, asking if his temperature was comfortable if he needed anything else, ensuring his absolute contentment before returning to the galley, passing Zoe's suite without acknowledgement. "Excuse me," Alexander called softly as Diane walked by. "Yes, sir," she responded, instantly attentive. "Could you please bring a pillow to the lady in 1A? I noticed she seems uncomfortable and I don't need mine." Diane's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, sir, though all passengers receive one pillow as standard. It's airline policy." "Interesting," Alexander replied. "The couple in 4A and 4B appear to have at least 4 between them." Diane's expression froze for a moment, then recovered. "I'll check on that. And I'll bring an extra pillow to 1A shortly." Meanwhile, in the operations center of Horizon Airways ground control in New York, a notification appeared on Elena Vasquez's monitor. As operations manager for Premium Cabin Experience, her job was to ensure that Horizon's highest-paying customers received impeccable service. The airline's proprietary Apex system, Advanced Passenger Experience, flagged potential service issues by monitoring call button response times, service request patterns, and customer-specific needs. The alert regarding Suite 1A on Flight 217 showed multiple call button activations with delayed response times and denied reasonable requests. Elena frowned, clicking through to the passenger manifest. "Dr. Zoe Williams," she murmured, scrolling through the passenger's profile. The system showed a VIP designation, though not the specific reason why. As she continued reading, her eyes widened. Dr. Williams was flagged as a passenger requiring highest-level courtesy with a direct line to executive management. Elena immediately opened a secure messaging channel to Jennifer Adams, the head purser on Flight 217. "Ground Ops, Jennifer. We're seeing service discrepancies in First Suite 1A. Passenger is VIP status. Please investigate and correct immediately." Back on the aircraft, Jennifer Adams was reviewing catering inventory in the mid-galley when her tablet chimed with the high-priority message. She frowned, checking the passenger list. Dr. Zoe Williams wasn't a name she recognized from their frequent VIP travelers, but the alert level was unusual, typically reserved for board members, celebrities under privacy protocols, or family of senior executives. Lucia Jennifer called as the young flight attendant passed. "How's the service in first class going?" Lucia hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before replying in a lowered voice. Everything's fine except... Diane seems to be treating the passenger in 1A differently. She's pregnant and asked for ginger tea for nausea, but Diane told her she had to wait for scheduled service. Then immediately brought the man in 2A a whiskey he asked for. Jennifer's frown deepened. In her 25 years with various airlines, she'd seen the damage that could be done by differential treatment of passengers, especially when race might be a factor. "I'll handle this," Jennifer said, heading toward the first-class cabin. As Jennifer made her way forward, Alexander Costa was surreptitiously recording a video on his phone. From his angle, he had a clear view of Diane deliberately skipping Zoe while distributing hot towels to all other first-class passengers. The discrimination wasn't dramatic or obvious, just a pattern of small, deniable oversights that collectively painted a disturbing picture. Jennifer observed this as she entered the cabin, her experienced eye immediately catching the service discrepancy. She approached Zoe's suite directly. "Dr. Williams, I'm Jennifer Adams, head purser on today's flight. I understand you requested some ginger tea for nausea." Zoe looked up, surprised by the sudden appearance of a more senior crew member. "Yes, though I was told it wasn't possible until the scheduled service." "There appears to have been a misunderstanding," Jennifer replied smoothly. "We absolutely accommodate such requests, especially for expectant mothers. I'll bring that right away. Would you also like some crackers? They often help with pregnancy nausea." "That would be wonderful." "Thank you." "Zoe," responded, the relief evident in her voice. As Jennifer turned to leave, she caught sight of Diane watching from the galley, her expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. Jennifer gave her a pointed look before heading to the galley to prepare the tea herself. "What are you doing?" Diane hissed when Jennifer entered the galley. "You're undermining me in front of the passengers. And you're providing discriminatory service to a VIP passenger, despite multiple warnings from ground ops." Jennifer countered quietly but firmly. "What exactly is your problem with Dr. Williams?" "I don't have a problem with her," Diane insisted. "She doesn't understand how first class works. Keeps making special requests outside of service times. Just like Mr. Peterson did when he requested a whiskey which you immediately provided," Jennifer pointed out. "The difference in how you're treating them is obvious, Diane, and it's being noticed not just by me but by other passengers and by our monitoring systems." Diane's face flushed. "She doesn't look like she belongs here. Probably used points or got upgraded." "Excuse me," Jennifer's voice sharpened. "What exactly does belonging in first class look like?" Realizing her mistake, Diane backpedaled. "I meant she seems unfamiliar with the protocols. Regular first-class passengers understand the service timing. Regular passengers like Mr. Peterson, who you just served off schedule?" Jennifer shook her head. "I'll be handling Dr. Williams myself for the remainder of the flight, and we'll discuss this further after landing." In the operations center, Elena watched the situation unfold through the service tracking system. The response times to Suite 1A were normalizing, but she remained concerned. The Apex system had flagged potential service discrimination a serious issue for an airline that positioned itself as the epitome of premium travel. Back in the first-class cabin, Jennifer delivered the ginger tea and crackers to Zoe, personally ensuring she was comfortable. "Thank you for addressing this," Zoe said quietly. "I appreciate it more than you know." Jennifer's expression was professional but genuine. "It's our job to provide excellent service to all our passengers, Dr. Williams. Please don't hesitate to ask for anything else you might need." As Jennifer walked away, Zoe noticed Alexander Costa watching the interaction intently. He gave her a small supportive nod, an acknowledgement that he had observed what was happening and found it troubling. For her part, Zoe remained gracious but watchful. The improved service was welcome, but she was under no illusions about what had precipitated the change. Someone higher up had recognized her name or status and intervened. It wasn't a victory against prejudice, just a temporary suspension based on her perceived importance. The baby kicked vigorously as if protesting the situation, and Zoe placed a gentle hand on her belly. "I know, little one," she whispered, "but we're halfway home." The words carried more weight than she intended. Halfway home, and yet the journey through spaces where her presence was questioned, her worth diminished, and her humanity conditionally acknowledged. That journey seemed endless. "Don't make waves, Zoe. Keep your head down, do your work, and be twice as good." Her mother's voice echoed in Zoe's mind as she sipped the ginger tea Jennifer had brought her. The advice, well-intentioned but heavy with the weight of generational trauma, had been a constant refrain throughout her childhood in Baltimore, where her parents, both educators, had raised her to understand that excellence was not just an aspiration but a necessity for survival. As the plane cruised at 38,000 feet over the Atlantic, Zoe allowed herself to drift into memories, the gentle hum of the engines providing a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. She remembered her first confrontation with racial bias in medicine. Not the subtle microaggressions that were almost daily occurrences, but the first time she'd faced overt discrimination from someone with power over her career. It had happened during her third year at Harvard Medical School. She had correctly diagnosed a complex cardiac condition in a young patient that her attending physician had missed. Instead of acknowledging her insight, he had publicly dismissed her, then presented her exact diagnosis as his own discovery during rounds the next day. When she'd gathered the courage to discuss this with her faculty advisor, a white woman who had positioned herself as an ally, the response had been telling. "These things happen," Zoe, the advisor, had said with sympathetic resignation. "Is this really a battle worth fighting? You need letters of recommendation for your residency applications. Do you want to be known as brilliant or difficult?" That moment had crystallized something for Zoe, the understanding that excellence alone wasn't enough, that the systems and spaces in which she operated weren't designed for her success, and that navigating them required careful calculation of when to speak up and when to strategically remain silent. The pattern continued throughout her residency at Johns Hopkins. The white male residents who were praised for being assertive and confident, while she was counseled to be less intimidating when she displayed the same traits. The patients who requested the real doctor when she entered their rooms. The constant need to introduce herself as Dr. Williams instead of just Zoe to be taken seriously. Yet, despite these obstacles, or perhaps because of them, she had persisted, excelled, and eventually distinguished herself as one of the top pediatric cardiothoracic surgeons in the country. The cost had been high, the exhaustion of constant vigilance, the emotional labor of educating others about their biases, the pressure to represent an entire race in spaces where she was often the only black person present. A fresh memory surfaced, more recent and more personal. 6 months ago, early in her pregnancy, she'd gone to an upscale baby boutique in Manhattan to look at cribs. Despite being dressed in designer clothing and carrying a handbag that cost more than some cars, she'd been ignored by sales staff for nearly 20 minutes while they attended to white customers who entered after her. When she'd finally asked for assistance, the saleswoman had directed her to the budget section, making assumptions about what she could afford based solely on her appearance. It wasn't until she mentioned specific high-end brands that the woman's demeanor changed, the same recalibration Zoe had witnessed countless times when people realized she didn't fit their preconceptions. Across the aisle, Diane was engaged in animated conversation with Mr. Peterson, laughing at his jokes and refreshing his drink without being asked. Her entire demeanor transformed when interacting with the older white businessman. Warm, solicitous, eager to please. It was as if she were two different flight attendants depending on which passenger she served. In the galley, another conversation was taking place. Diane had cornered Lucia near the supply cabinet, her voice low but intense. "You went behind my back about that pillow," she accused. Lucia stood her ground, though her hands trembled slightly. "I didn't. The passenger in 3B offered his. And you should have consulted me before taking it to her. I'm the senior attendant on this flight." "Diane, She's pregnant and uncomfortable. What's the problem with helping her? Diane glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard, then lowered her voice further. Look, I've been flying first class for 25 years. I know the regulars, the types who actually pay for these seats instead of using points or getting lucky with upgrades. What does that have to do with service quality? Lucia challenged her concern, overcoming her usual deference to seniority. Everything. First class has standards, protocols. When people aren't familiar with them, it disrupts the service for everyone else. Lucia's discomfort was evident. I don't think that's fair. Dr. Williams hasn't disrupted anything. She's been nothing but polite. You're new. Diane dismissed. You don't understand how things work up here yet. These people? These people. Lucia repeated, her eyes widening slightly. Diane realized her mistake too late. I meant inexperienced travelers. They don't understand how things work. Dr. Williams seems perfectly capable of understanding service schedules, Lucia replied. And even if she didn't, isn't it our job to make the experience comfortable for everyone? Diane's expression hardened. Just stick to your assigned duties and let me handle 1A. Meanwhile, Elena Vasquez in New York Operations Center had pulled up Dr. Williams's complete passenger profile and was startled by what she found. The VIP designation wasn't just routine. It was executive level with a direct connection to the ownership structure of Horizon Airways. Elena immediately sent another message to Jennifer Adams. Ground ops, Jennifer update on 1A. Passenger is highest priority VIP, personal connection to ownership. Ensure absolute service excellence and report any issues directly to me. On the aircraft, Jennifer read the message with growing concern. Highest priority VIP with ownership connections could only mean one thing. Dr. Williams was either a major investor or related to someone in Horizon's executive suite. Given the situation that had already developed, this was potentially disastrous. Jennifer made her way back to the first-class cabin where Diane was now demonstratively attending to the honeymoon couple, showing them how to adjust their suite lighting while pointedly ignoring Suite 1A, despite passing directly by it. Diane? A word, please, Jennifer requested quietly. In the galley, Jennifer closed the curtain for privacy. I've received another update from Ground Ops, Doctor. Williams is not just a VIP. She has direct connections to Horizon ownership. Diane's face paled slightly. What kind of connections they didn't specify, but the alert level is the highest I've seen. Whatever you've been doing, or not doing, for her, needs to stop immediately. This is ridiculous, Diane muttered. She doesn't look like anyone important. Jennifer's patience finally snapped. And what exactly does important look like, Diane? Because from where I'm standing, it seems you've decided that a young black woman doesn't fit your image of a legitimate first-class passenger, regardless of her actual status. That's not fair. This has nothing to do with race, Diane protested, though her eyes slid away from Jennifer's direct gaze. Doesn't it? Because I've been watching since I got that first alert, and I've seen how differently you treat her compared to everyone else in that cabin. It's subtle, but it's there. I've been flying for 25 years. I know first-class passengers. She's not one of them. Not really. And that right there is exactly the problem, Jennifer replied. You've decided who belongs and who doesn't based on what? How they look. Their age. Their race. That's not just poor service, Diane. That's prejudice, and it has no place on this aircraft or in this company. Diane fell silent, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Finally, she said, Fine. I'll make sure she gets whatever she wants for the rest of the flight. See that you do, Jennifer replied. And we'll be discussing this further with management after landing. As Jennifer returned to her duties, Diane remained in the galley seething. In her 25 years as a flight attendant, she had risen to the position of head flight attendant, only to see her career stagnate while younger, more diverse candidates received promotions to management. Her pension had been reduced during Horizon's restructuring 4 years ago, when the new ownership took over, and at 48, with a mortgage underwater and mounting credit card debt, the prospect of starting over at another airline was daunting. First class had been her domain, her small kingdom where she still wielded some authority. She took pride in recognizing real premium passengers and catering to their needs, the business executives, the wealthy retirees, the occasional celebrity. They fit a certain mold, spoke a certain way, carried themselves with a particular air that came from generational wealth and privilege. Dr. Williams disrupted that pattern. Young black pregnant dressed simply. She didn't match Diane's mental image of first-class legitimacy. And rather than examining this bias, Diane had leaned into it, justified it, acted on it through a series of small but significant service failures that collectively amounted to discrimination. Now faced with the knowledge that this passenger had connections to ownership, Diane felt trapped. Her behavior had been noticed, documented even, and the potential consequences loomed large. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not at her age, not in this economy. Back in Suite 1A, Zoe was unaware of these behind-the-scenes tensions. She had managed to doze off briefly, lulled by the plane's steady movement and the relief of finally receiving adequate service after Jennifer's intervention. She was awakened by a sharp pain in her lower abdomen, not contraction-like but uncomfortable enough to make her wince. Her obstetrician had cleared her for this trip, but warned against stress and extended periods of sitting. She needed to walk, to stretch, to use the lavatory more frequently than usual. Zoe pressed the call button, and this time Diane appeared almost immediately, her smile fixed and artificial. "How can I help you, doctor?" "Williams." The solicitude in her voice was forced, the courtesy mechanical. "I need to walk a bit and use the lavatory," Zoe explained. "The baby is pressing on my bladder quite insistently." "Of course," Diane replied with an exaggerated helpfulness that bordered on parody. "Let me assist you." She extended a hand which Zoe politely declined as she eased herself out of the seat. Standing in the aisle, she took a moment to find her balance, one hand supporting her lower back. Alexander Costa watched the interaction carefully, noting the dramatic shift in Diane's behavior. Something had changed, but the insincerity was obvious. This wasn't respect, but fear. Not courtesy, but self-preservation. As Zoe made her way slowly toward the first-class lavatory, she felt the familiar sensation of eyes on her back, the weight of unspoken judgment, the pressure of being simultaneously invisible and hypervisible, depending on what others needed from her in the moment. It was a feeling she had hoped to shield her son from, at least in his earliest years. But increasingly, she wondered if such protection was even possible in a world where people like Diane Miller still decided who belonged and who didn't, based on the color of their skin. Passenger movement during meal service is not recommended for safety reasons. Diane's voice cut through the cabin as Zoe attempted to stand again, this time during the pre-landing meal service that had begun about 40 minutes before their scheduled arrival at JFK. The nausea had returned with greater intensity, accompanied by an uncomfortable pressure in her lower back that made sitting increasingly unbearable. "I understand," Zoe replied calmly, "but I need to use the lavatory. The baby is pressing on my bladder." Diane positioned herself in the aisle, blocking Zoe's path. "The seatbelt sign will be turned on shortly for our descent. If you could just wait until after we land, I cannot wait," Zoe stated firmly, her physician's understanding of her own body overriding her usual tendency to accommodate. "I need to go now." By this point, several passengers had taken notice of the confrontation. Alexander Costa had subtly positioned his phone to record while Mr. Peterson had lowered his newspaper to observe with a frown. The honeymoon couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. From across the aisle, an older white woman in 1B spoke up. "Let her through, for heaven's sake. She's pregnant." "Ma'am, I'm simply following safety protocols," Diane replied stiffly. "Nonsense," the woman continued. "I've flown first class for 30 years, and I've never been stopped from using the restroom before descent. You're being unreasonable." A middle-aged man a few rows back added, "Yeah, what's the problem? Just let her use the bathroom." But another passenger, a businessman in his late 50s, countered, "The attendant is right. Rules are rules for everyone's safety. If the seatbelt sign is about to come on, it's not on yet," Alexander Costa pointed out calmly. "And even when it is, allowances are made for urgent needs." The cabin had become divided, most passengers sympathetic to Zoe's situation, but a few siding with Diane's position on protocol. The tension in the air was palpable. "Is there a problem?" Jennifer appeared at Diane's side, her expression shifting from professional inquiry to concern as she took in the situation. "Dr. Williams needs to use the lavatory, but we're about to begin descent procedures," Diane explained, as if this justified blocking a pregnant woman's access to the bathroom. "The lavatory is still available for the next 10 minutes, Jennifer corrected, shooting Diane a pointed look. "Dr. Williams, please go ahead. Would you like some assistance?" "No, thank you. I can manage." Zoe moved past Diane, who reluctantly stepped aside but remained rigid, her disapproval evident in every line of her body. As Zoe made her way to the lavatory, she heard Diane mutter under her breath, just loud enough to be heard, "Always wanting special treatment." The comment hung in the air, its implication clear enough that even Jennifer froze momentarily. Zoe paused, then continued to the lavatory without responding, maintaining her dignity despite the deliberate provocation. Inside the small but luxuriously appointed bathroom, Zoe leaned against the marble countertop, taking slow, measured breaths. The nausea was intensifying, a wave of dizziness accompanying it. She splashed cool water on her face and wrists, a technique she'd learned during her early pregnancy when morning sickness had been particularly severe. The baby kicked vigorously as if protesting the tension. "I know, little one," she whispered, placing a hand on her belly. "Just a little longer." When she emerged from the lavatory a few minutes later, Diane was waiting directly outside, ostensibly arranging items on the refreshment cart, but effectively creating another obstacle. "Excuse me," Zoe said politely. Diane moved the cart inch by inch, deliberately slow, forcing Zoe to wait in the confined space. "We're preparing for landing. You'll need to return to your seat immediately." The power play was small but pointed, another assertion of control, another reminder of who Diane believed held authority in this space. Diane Jennifer called from the galley, her tone sharp with warning. "Clear the aisle, please." With visible reluctance, Diane moved the cart fully to the side, allowing Zoe to pass. As Zoe carefully made her way back to Suite 1A, she felt a rush of lightheadedness that forced her to pause, placing one hand on a seat back to steady herself. Alexander Costa noticed immediately. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, half rising from his seat. "Just a bit dizzy," Zoe admitted. "I'll be fine once I sit down." Diane, who had followed behind with the cart, made a dismissive sound. "The captain has already announced we're expecting turbulence. This is why passengers should remain seated when instructed." The comment was just loud enough to carry to nearby suites an implicit criticism disguised as procedural concern. It was the kind of remark designed to place blame, to frame Zoe as difficult or demanding rather than as a pregnant woman with legitimate physical needs. From her seat, the older woman in 1B spoke up again. "Oh, for goodness sake, stop harassing the poor woman and help her to her seat." "I don't need," Zoe began. "I was addressing her needs appropriately," Diane replied defensively. "No, you weren't," said another voice, the businessman who had earlier supported Diane's position on rules. His tone had shifted. "I'm a licensed pilot myself, and there is no safety protocol that justifies treating a pregnant passenger this way. Your behavior is unprofessional." Jennifer stepped forward. "Dr. Williams, let me help you back to your seat. Diane, please prepare the cabin for landing as discussed." The reprimand was professional but unmistakable. Diane's face flushed with anger as she pushed the cart back toward the galley with more force than necessary. Once Zoe was settled in her suite, Jennifer discreetly checked on her. "Is there anything else you need before landing? Perhaps some more ginger tea for the nausea. That would be wonderful." "Thank you," Zoe replied, grateful for the consideration. As Jennifer departed, Zoe caught sight of Alexander Costa watching the interaction with obvious concern. He offered a small, supportive smile, which she returned with a grateful nod. It was a moment of quiet solidarity and acknowledgement of what they both recognized was happening. In the galley, tension had reached a breaking point between Diane and Jennifer. "You're undermining me in front of the passengers," Diane hissed aggressively, stacking cups on a tray. "And you're providing discriminatory service to a VIP passenger despite multiple warnings," Jennifer countered, keeping her voice low but firm. "What exactly is your problem with Dr. Williams?" "I don't have a problem with her. I have a problem with the entitlement attitude. Just because she's in first class doesn't mean she gets to ignore safety procedures." "What safety procedures?" "The seatbelt sign wasn't even on yet, and she's pregnant. Bathroom access is a basic need, not a luxury service. She's been demanding special attention the entire flight," Diane insisted. "Has she?" "Because from what I've observed and what Lucia reported, she's been nothing but polite and patient despite receiving subpar service from you." Diane's expression hardened. "You don't understand what it's like dealing with these types of passengers who think—" "These types?" Jennifer interrupted, her eyebrows raised. "What types would those be exactly?" Realizing her mistake, Diane backpedaled. "I meant inexperienced first-class travelers who don't understand how things work up here. Dr. Williams has been incredibly patient with your rudeness, Diane. Most passengers would have complained hours ago." "Rudeness? I've been professional the entire time." "Professional?" Jennifer scoffed. "You questioned her seat assignment, denied her an extra pillow that we absolutely have available, skipped her during service, made her wait for basic requests, and just now tried to prevent her from using the bathroom while pregnant. If that's your definition of professional, we have very different dictionaries." Before Diane could respond, Lucia appeared with an empty teacup. "Dr. Williams asked if she could have a little more ginger tea before we land. She's still feeling nauseated." "I'll take care of it," Jennifer replied, turning away from Diane to prepare the tea. Diane seized the opportunity for a final word. "When this is over, I'll be filing a complaint about how you've handled this situation. I've been with this airline for 25 years, and I've never been treated with such disrespect by a purser." Jennifer turned back slowly, her expression one of disbelief. "Go ahead and file whatever you want, but be aware that I'll be submitting a full report about your treatment of Dr. Williams, with witness statements if necessary. 25 years of experience doesn't excuse prejudice, Diane." "Prejudice? How dare you? How dare I? What?" "Call out what's plainly happening. You've singled out the only black passenger in first class for different treatment from the moment she boarded." "This has nothing to do with race," Diane insisted, though her eyes slid away from Jennifer's direct gaze. "Doesn't it? Because I've been watching since I got that first alert from Elena, and your behavior changes completely depending on which passenger you're serving. Mr. Peterson gets royal treatment. The honeymoon couple gets smiles and extra attention. Dr. Williams gets questioned, delayed, and treated with suspicion. What would you call that pattern if not prejudice?" Diane's face flushed with anger. "You don't understand. This job is all I have left. After the restructuring, my pension was cut in half. I can't afford to retire, can't afford to start over somewhere else. First class was the one place where I still had some control, some respect. And you think that justifies treating passengers differently based on how they look? That's not just wrong, Diane. It's potentially a violation of company policy and anti-discrimination laws." Before the argument could escalate further, the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their initial descent into JFK International Airport and instructing flight attendants to prepare the cabin for landing. "We'll continue this discussion after landing," Jennifer said firmly. Right now, our priority is passenger safety. I'll take Dr. Williams her tea." When Jennifer delivered the fresh cup of ginger tea to Suite 1A, she noticed Zoe's pallor and the fine sheen of perspiration on her forehead. "Are you feeling all right, Dr. Williams?" "Just the usual pregnancy discomforts amplified by flying," Zoe replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll be fine once we're on the ground." Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "We'll be landing in about 30 minutes. Is there anything else I can do for your comfort in the meantime?" "No, thank you. You've been very kind." As Jennifer turned to leave, Zoe added quietly, "I appreciate your intervention earlier." Not everyone would have stepped in. The acknowledgement was simple but loaded with meaning. Recognition from one woman to another about the reality of the situation and the courage it took to address it directly. "It's my job to ensure every passenger receives proper service," Jennifer replied. "Though in this case, it's also just basic human decency." After Jennifer left, Zoe sipped her tea, slowly trying to settle both her stomach and her thoughts. The confrontation had been minor in the grand scheme of things. A small, contained example of the prejudice she had faced throughout her life. But pregnancy had heightened her emotions, made her more protective, not just of herself, but of the child she was carrying. Each slight, each microaggression felt like an attack not just on her dignity, but on her son's future. She thought of Dominic waiting for her at JFK. Wondered what he would say about this situation. He had a different approach to such matters. Direct, uncompromising, focused on consequences. "Respect isn't optional," he often said. "It's the bare minimum." As the plane began its descent, the cabin lights brightened slightly and passengers were instructed to return their seats to the upright position. Diane moved efficiently through the cabin, checking compliance, warm and solicitous with the white passengers, perfunctorily professional with Zoe. The contrast was so obvious now that Jennifer had highlighted it, that even Mr. Peterson in 2A seemed to notice his brow furrowing as he observed the difference in treatment between his interaction with Diane and the one she had with Zoe immediately after. The plane continued its descent through scattered clouds, the sprawl of New York gradually becoming visible below. For most passengers, it represented the end of a routine journey. For Zoe, it couldn't come soon enough. The nausea had intensified and the baby's movements had become more vigorous, almost agitated. She closed her eyes, briefly focusing on her breathing. Just a little longer, and then home. Just a little longer, and then Dominic with his unwavering support and his absolute certainty about her worth. Just a little longer. But as the plane banked toward its final approach, Zoe didn't know that the true confrontation was yet to come. That the tension which had been building throughout the flight was about to reach its breaking point in a way that would change everything. Flight attendants prepare for landing. The captain's voice crackled through the cabin as the aircraft began its final descent into JFK International Airport. Outside the windows, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the New York skyline, the familiar silhouette of Manhattan visible in the distance. Inside Suite 1A, Zoe shifted uncomfortably, pressing a hand against her lower back where the pain had intensified. The nausea had subsided slightly thanks to the ginger tea, but the pressure from the baby had become more pronounced during descent. She took slow, measured breaths, a technique she'd learned during her prenatal classes, focusing on the thought of Dominic waiting for her at the arrivals gate. The seatbelt sign had been illuminated, and most passengers were complying with landing procedures, stowing personal items, and adjusting their seats. Alexander Costa in 3B had reluctantly put away his phone after capturing one final video of Diane's contrasting treatment of passengers during the pre-landing check. As the plane descended through 10,000 feet, Zoe felt a sudden wave of dizziness coupled with intense pressure in her bladder. She knew the protocols about remaining seated during final descent, but the discomfort was becoming unbearable. Pregnancy had a way of making even the most basic bodily functions urgent and non-negotiable. She pressed the call button, hoping Jennifer would respond. Instead, Diane appeared her expression a mask of barely contained annoyance. "The seatbelt sign is on," Diane stated before Zoe could even speak. "All passengers must remain seated." "I understand," Zoe replied, keeping her voice calm despite her discomfort. "But I'm experiencing significant pressure and I need to use the lavatory urgently. The baby is... All passengers must remain seated during landing." Diane repeated louder this time, as if Zoe hadn't heard her the first time. "It's an FAA regulation for your own safety." Zoe took a deep breath. As a physician, she understood safety protocols, but she also understood her body's needs. "I recognize the protocol, but this is a medical necessity. I just need a quick moment to rules. Don't change just because you're pregnant." Diane cut her off, her tone sharp enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. Everyone else manages to follow them. The statement hung in the air, pointed, dismissive, laden with implication. Around them, the cabin had grown quieter as passengers became aware of the confrontation. From across the aisle, the woman in 1B leaned forward again. "Young lady, let her pass. I had 3 children myself, and when you need to go, you need to go." "Ma'am, please stay out of this," Diane replied, her professional veneer cracking further. "This is a safety matter." "It's a matter of basic human dignity," the woman countered. The businessman who had earlier criticized Diane added, "If it's truly a safety issue, you could accompany her to ensure she returns promptly. That's standard procedure." Diane's face flushed with anger at being challenged by multiple passengers. "I am following procedure." If every passenger decided their comfort was more important than safety. "This isn't about comfort," Zoe interjected, her physician's authority finally showing through her usual reserve. "This is about preventing potential medical issues. Urinary tract infections are a serious concern for pregnant women and can trigger preterm labor. I'm not requesting this frivolously." "I'm not going to argue medical technicalities," Diane replied dismissively. "The seatbelt sign is on and you need to remain seated." "I'm not asking for your medical opinion," Zoe said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm telling you as a doctor that I need to use the lavatory now." She began to unfasten her seatbelt, her decision made regardless of Diane's objections. Diane stepped closer, physically inserting herself into the suite entrance. "Ma'am, I've already told you, and I've already explained my situation," Zoe replied, rising carefully to her feet despite Diane's imposing presence. "I am not going to risk a urinary tract infection which can trigger premature labor because of your inflexibility. I will be quick." As Zoe attempted to step into the aisle, Diane moved directly in front of her, creating a physical barrier. They stood face to face in the confined space, tension crackling between them. "You need to sit down immediately," Diane demanded, her voice rising. "I need to use the lavatory," Zoe countered firmly. "Please step aside." By now the confrontation had drawn the attention of the entire first-class cabin. Alexander had angled his phone discreetly to capture the interaction. The honeymoon couple watched wide-eyed from their suites. Mr. Peterson had set aside his financial papers, entirely frowning at the escalating situation. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you," Diane said, her voice low but carrying in the hushed cabin. The words landed like a physical blow. "You people." The loaded phrase hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Zoe stilled a cold clarity washing over her. "What exactly do you mean by you people?" she asked quietly. Diane's eyes widened slightly, perhaps realizing her misstep, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You know exactly what I mean. First class has standards. This airline has standards, and your behavior is not meeting them." From 2 rows back, Alexander's grip tightened on his phone, ensuring he captured every word of the exchange. The naked prejudice in Diane's tone was unmistakable now, stripped of its earlier veneer of professionalism. "My behavior," Zoe repeated, her voice dangerously controlled. I have been nothing but patient, despite your persistent rudeness, since the moment I boarded this plane. I am a 7-month pregnant woman who needs to use the lavatory. The only person not meeting standards here is you." Each word was precise, measured landing with quiet force. For Diane, it was the final humiliation, being called out for her behavior in front of the entire cabin she considered her domain. Her authority, the only thing she felt she had left in her diminished professional life, was being challenged by a woman she had deemed unworthy from the first moment. Something in Diane snapped. Her face contorted with a rage that had been building throughout the flight, fueled by years of perceived slights, professional disappointments, and deeply ingrained prejudice. "You will not disrespect me on my aircraft," she hissed. And then, before anyone could react, Diane's hand shot out a swift, deliberate movement, culminating in a sharp, cracking slap that connected with Zoe's cheek. The sound echoed through the stunned silence of the first-class cabin. A collective gasp rose from the witnesses. Lucia, who had just entered from the galley, brought her hands to her mouth in horror. Alexander's phone remained steady, capturing the shocking moment. Zoe stood frozen, her hand rising slowly to touch her cheek where an angry red mark was already forming. In her 36 years, through all the discrimination and microaggressions she had endured, no one had ever physically struck her. The violation was so absolute, so unexpected, that for a moment she couldn't process what had happened. Her first thought was not for herself, but for her baby. Had the shock, the stress affected him? Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, protective, concerned. The silence lasted only seconds before the cabin erupted in voices. "She hit her," exclaimed the woman from the honeymoon couple. "That was completely uncalled for," Mr. Peterson stated firmly, rising halfway from his seat. "I've got it all on video," Alexander announced, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Every second of it." Diane seemed to come back to herself, realizing what she had done. A flicker of panic crossed her face, quickly replaced by defensive anger. She was becoming aggressive and refused to follow safety instructions, she said loudly, already constructing her narrative. "I was ensuring the safety of all passengers." It was a preposterous lie immediately contradicted by multiple witnesses. "That's not what happened at all," the woman in 1B called out. "You blocked her path and then assaulted her when she stood up for herself." "You assaulted a pregnant woman," another passenger exclaimed. Jennifer burst into the cabin, alerted by the commotion. She took in the scene, Zoe standing still with a hand to her reddened cheek. Diane's defensive posture, the outraged passengers. "What happened here?" she demanded, though the answer was written clearly on Zoe's face and in the charged atmosphere of the cabin. "She struck Dr. Williams," Alexander said, lowering his phone. "I have the entire incident recorded, including the racially charged comments that preceded it." Jennifer's face paled as she looked from Zoe to Diane, the full catastrophic implications of the situation hitting her at once. A flight attendant had physically assaulted a pregnant passenger, a VIP passenger with connections to ownership, in full view of a cabin full of witnesses with video evidence. "Dr. Williams," she said, her voice tight with professional control, masking horror, "please come with me. We need to get you seated and make sure you and your baby are okay." Zoe nodded, still in shock, allowing Jennifer to guide her back to her seat. Her medical training told her to remain calm, to monitor for any signs of distress from the baby, to control her own stress response for his sake. But beneath the professional self-assessment, a deep well of emotion was building, anger, hurt, and a profound sadness that such moments still existed in the world her son would soon enter. Diane remained rooted in place, her expression shifting between defiance and dawning terror as she began to comprehend the magnitude of what she had done. Around her, the atmosphere had transformed from the usual hushed reverence of first class to a courtroom of sorts, with passengers serving as witnesses to an indefensible act. "I want to file a formal complaint," the businessman stated firmly to Jennifer. "And I'm willing to provide my contact information and a statement." Other passengers voiced similar intentions, their earlier passive observation transformed into active condemnation of what they had witnessed. The balance of power had shifted completely, with Diane now isolated, her authority evaporated in the wake of her inexcusable behavior. As Zoe settled back into her seat, a single tear escaped despite her best efforts at composure. It wasn't the physical pain of the slap that had broken through her carefully maintained dignity. It was the stark reminder that no amount of education, achievement, or status could fully shield her or her son from the reality of prejudice. The plane continued its descent toward JFK, the New York skyline growing closer by the minute. But inside the aircraft, everything had changed. An invisible line had been crossed, a boundary violated, and the consequences would extend far beyond this flight, this moment, this cabin in the sky. "Please come with me, Dr. Williams. We need to address this situation immediately." Jennifer's voice was professionally calm, but the tension underneath was unmistakable as she guided Zoe toward the galley area. The plane had entered its final approach to JFK. The seatbelt sign still illuminated, but the unprecedented assault had created an emergency situation that overrode normal landing protocols. The forward galley was a stark contrast to the luxurious cabin, all stainless steel efficiency and bright utilitarian lighting. It felt like an interrogation room, clinical and exposed. Jennifer gestured to a small jump seat attached to the wall. "Please, sit down. Can I get you some water?" Zoe nodded, one hand still protectively cradling her belly, the other occasionally touching her cheek where the imprint of Diane's hand still burned. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold anger and professional concern about the potential stress on her pregnancy. Lucia appeared with a cup of water and a cold compress. "For your cheek," she said softly, her eyes wide with distress. "I'm so sorry this happened." Diane had been escorted to the rear galley by another crew member, physically separating her from Zoe and the first-class passengers who had witnessed the assault. The separation was as much for Diane's protection as Zoe's. The mood in the cabin had turned decidedly hostile toward the flight attendant. Dr. Williams Jennifer began adopting the formal, measured tone of someone constructing an official report in her head. "I need to understand exactly what happened leading up to the physical contact." Zoe took a sip of water, gathering her thoughts. "I needed to use the lavatory urgently due to pregnancy pressure. When I attempted to stand, Ms. Miller blocked my path and insisted I remain seated despite my explanation of medical necessity. When I persisted, she made a comment about you people always thinking rules don't apply. I questioned that phrase, and she became increasingly agitated. When I pointed out that her behavior was unprofessional, she slapped me." Jennifer's face remained composed, but her eyes reflected dismay. "Did Miss Miller touch you in any other way or make any other comments that could be considered discriminatory?" Throughout the flight, she provided noticeably different service to me compared to other passengers. Denied reasonable requests, delayed responses, questioned my seat assignment when I first boarded. Zoe's voice remained steady, factual, the voice of a surgeon accustomed to precise, unemotional reporting of critical information. The pattern was consistent enough that other passengers noticed. Jennifer nodded, making notes on her tablet. Several passengers have already offered statements and contact information, including the gentleman in 3B who recorded the incident. Alexander, Zoe supplied. He was watching the situation develop for some time. "Yes, his documentation will be crucial in our internal investigation." Jennifer hesitated, then asked with genuine concern, "How are you feeling physically? Should we request medical personnel to meet the aircraft?" Zoe considered this, her hand still resting on her belly. The baby had been active, but not distressed. She could feel his regular movements. "I don't believe that's necessary, but I would appreciate being first off the aircraft when we land. My husband will be waiting, and I'd prefer to minimize any further stress." "Of course," Jennifer agreed quickly. "We'll arrange priority deplaning for you." A discreet chime sounded on Jennifer's tablet. She glanced down at the message, her expression shifting subtly. "Excuse me a moment," she said, stepping a few feet away to respond to what appeared to be an urgent communication. Left briefly alone, Zoe closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing and the reassuring movements of her son. In the operating room, she had learned to compartmentalize emotions to function with precision regardless of circumstance. That training served her now, keeping panic at bay, maintaining her professional composure despite the violation she had experienced. From the other side of the galley, she could hear snippets of Jennifer's hushed conversation, confirmed on video, witnessed by entire cabin, corporate crisis protocol. Yes, immediately upon landing. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Diane sat in a jump seat ostensibly secured for landing but effectively placed in isolation. Thomas, another flight attendant, stood nearby, his expression grim. "They can't prove anything," Diane muttered more to herself than to him. It was a safety issue. She was being aggressive. "I saw the video," Diane Thomas said quietly. "There's nothing to prove or disprove. It's all there." "You don't understand," Diane continued, her voice taking on a frantic edge. "These people come on board thinking they're entitled to special treatment just because they have a first-class ticket." She was creating a disturbance. "I was maintaining order." "By slapping a pregnant woman?" Thomas asked, his voice low with disbelief. "In what universe is that maintaining order?" "It was just a reaction," she said, her tone shifting from defiance to something approaching panic. She was being disrespectful. 25 years. I've given this airline, and some entitled passenger thinks she can talk to me like that?" Thomas shook his head slightly. "This isn't about disrespect, Diane. You hit a pregnant woman, in first class, on camera. She provoked me." "Nothing provokes hitting a passenger," Thomas replied firmly. "Especially not a pregnant one. That's assault, plain and simple." The plane dipped lower, the landing gear engaging with a mechanical whine. New York spread beneath them, the afternoon sun glinting off glass towers and the waters of the harbor. They were minutes from touchdown, but Diane's world was already crashing around her. Back in the forward galley, Jennifer had returned to Zoe with a noticeably changed demeanor, more deferential, almost anxious. "Dr. Williams, I've just received confirmation that representatives from Horizon corporate headquarters will meet the aircraft upon arrival. They've requested that you remain seated after landing until they come aboard." The shift in Jennifer's attitude was subtle, but unmistakable. Something had changed in the last few minutes beyond just the confirmation of a corporate response. "My husband will be very concerned if I'm delayed," Zoe said. "Of course. We'll ensure he's informed immediately. The corporate team specifically mentioned accommodating any requests you might have." Jennifer's tone had taken on a new note of solicitousness that hadn't been present before. Zoe studied her face recognition dawning. "They know who I am, don't they?" Jennifer hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Ground operations has flagged your passenger profile at the highest priority level. They didn't share details, but it appears you have significant connections to Horizon leadership." A small, tired smile touched Zoe's lips. "I see. And now that I'm not just a black woman in first class, but someone with connections, everything changes." The observation wasn't accusatory, just a weary acknowledgement of a reality she had experienced countless times before. The sudden shift from questioned presence to valued guest, based solely on the perception of power or influence. Jennifer had the grace to look uncomfortable. "For what it's worth, I intervened before knowing about any VIP status. What happened to you was wrong, regardless of who you are." "I appreciate that," Zoe replied sincerely. Not everyone would have. The aircraft touched down with a slight bump, tires screeching briefly against the runway before the reverse thrusters engaged, pressing them gently forward in their seats. They had arrived at JFK, but the real drama was just beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to John F. Kennedy International Airport," the captain's voice announced over the PA system. "Local time is 4:42 p.m. and the temperature is 68 degrees. For operational reasons, we ask that all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened until further notice. We appreciate your patience and understanding." The unusual request prompted murmurs throughout the cabin, but in first class, where passengers had witnessed the assault, there was knowing silence. They understood that this was no ordinary landing, no routine deplaning process. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Zoe felt a growing urgency to contact Dominic. She knew he would be waiting, probably pacing anxiously as he tracked the flight's progress on his phone. He hated being separated from her during the pregnancy, had only reluctantly agreed to her making this trip alone because of its importance to her career. "Is it possible for me to use my phone now?" she asked Jennifer. "My husband will be concerned." Jennifer hesitated. "Technically, we're still an active taxi, but under the circumstances—" She glanced around before nodding discreetly. "Go ahead. Just keep it brief and discreet, please." Zoe retrieved her phone from her purse and dialed Dominic's number. He answered on the first ring. "Zoe, are you on the ground?" His deep voice carried the unmistakable edge of concern. "Yes, we just landed," she replied, keeping her voice low. "But there's been an incident on the flight." "I'm all right," she added quickly, "but there will be some delay in deplaning." "What kind of incident?" Dominic's tone shifted instantly from concern to alert focus. Zoe took a deep breath. "A flight attendant struck me." The silence that followed was profound, charged with the dangerous stillness that Dominic's closest associates recognized as his true anger, not explosive, but cold, focused, and implacable. She did what his voice had dropped almost to a whisper. "She slapped me," after a series of discriminatory actions throughout the flight. "It's been recorded, there are witnesses, and the airline appears to be mobilizing some sort of corporate response team to meet the plane." Another silence. Then, "Are you hurt?" "The baby." "We're both fine," Zoe assured him. "Just shaken. Apparently corporate representatives will board before anyone deplanes. They've asked me to wait." "Give me the flight attendant's name." Dominic requested, his tone deceptively calm. "Diane Miller," Zoe said, then added Dominic. "Please don't. I'm not going to do anything rash," he interrupted, though his voice carried the unmistakable note of someone already formulating a response. "But this will be addressed. Thoroughly." Before Zoe could reply, Jennifer approached again. "Dr. Williams, we've reached the gate. I need to ask you to end your call now." "I have to go," Zoe told Dominic. "They've reached the gate." "I'll be waiting," he replied. "And Zoe, this ends today." The line disconnected, and Zoe returned her phone to her purse, a strange calm settling over her. Dominic's final words echoed in her mind. "This ends today." It wasn't just grave, but composed. "On behalf of the entire company, I want to express our profound apologies for what occurred on this flight. We have a medical team standing by if you need any attention." Zoe shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Thank you, but I don't believe medical attention is necessary. I would, however, like to disembark as soon as possible." "My husband is waiting." Victoria nodded. "Of course. We've arranged for immediate deplaning for you with an escort directly to the terminal." She hesitated, then added with careful precision, "Mr. Jackson is waiting in our private lounge. He's been briefed on the situation." The use of Dominic's name confirmed what Zoe had suspected from Jennifer's changed demeanor. They now knew exactly who she was. Not just Dr. Zoe Williams, cardiothoracic surgeon, but Zoe Williams Jackson, wife of Dominic Jackson, the billionaire who owned 40% of Horizon Airways and sat as chairman of its board of directors. Victoria turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay in deplaning. We're dealing with an internal matter that requires immediate attention. Those of you in first class will be allowed to disembark shortly, but we ask for your patience and cooperation. If you witnessed the incident that occurred during landing, Horizon representatives will be available in the terminal to take your statements." From the rear galley, Diane was watching with growing alarm as the corporate machinery began to engage. The appearance of the COO herself, accompanied by Port Authority officers, signaled that this was being treated as a major incident, not a minor infraction that could be managed internally. Jennifer approached her expression grim. "Diane, you're to remain on board after all passengers have deplaned. Ms. Reynolds will speak with you directly." "This is ridiculous," Diane protested, though her voice lacked conviction. It was a minor altercation during a safety procedure. "Striking a passenger is never minor," Jennifer replied coldly. "And striking a pregnant passenger who happens to be married to the chairman of the board is career-ending." The color drained from Diane's face as the full implications hit her. "The chairman of the board? Who is she?" Dr. Williams is married to Dominic Jackson. The same Dominic Jackson who acquired Horizon 4 years ago and personally oversees our service standards. Diane felt the floor shift beneath her, reality distorting as the magnitude of her actions came into devastating focus. The woman she had dismissed, demeaned, and ultimately struck wasn't just any passenger. She was connected to the very top of the corporate structure, to the man who effectively signed her paychecks. "I didn't know," she whispered, as if that might somehow mitigate what she had done. "Would it have made a difference?" Jennifer asked pointedly. "If you'd known who she was married to, would you have treated her with the respect every passenger deserves?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because they both knew the answer. Diane's treatment of Zoe had been based entirely on perception and prejudice, on the assumption that a young black woman didn't truly belong in first class, regardless of the ticket she held. Had she known Zoe's connection to ownership, her behavior would undoubtedly have been different, proving the very bias at the heart of the issue. In the first-class cabin, Victoria Reynolds was personally escorting Zoe toward the exit. "We've arranged for your luggage to be expedited through customs and delivered directly to your car," she explained. "Mr. Jackson was quite insistent about minimizing any further inconvenience to you." "I'm sure he was," Zoe replied with a small, knowing smile. Dominic's response to the situation was entirely predictable to anyone who knew him well. He was methodical in business but fiercely protective of his family. As they reached the aircraft door, Alexander Costa stepped into the aisle. "Dr. Williams," he called, holding up his phone. "I have the entire incident recorded. I'd be happy to provide the footage to you or your representatives." Victoria immediately produced a business card. Alexander Costa. "We've already taken your contact information from the manifest. If you could send the footage directly to this secure address, our legal department will be in touch regarding your statement." Alexander nodded, but addressed Zoe directly. "I'm sorry this happened to you. No one should be treated that way, especially not someone in your condition. Thank you for your awareness and willingness to speak up." Zoe replied sincerely. "It makes a difference." Other passengers were offering similar sentiments, expressions of outrage and support that created a stark contrast to the passive observation that had characterized most of the flight. It was a common pattern Zoe had observed throughout her life. People recognized injustice, but often remained silent until a breaking point was reached, or until someone else took the first step. "I flew Horizon regularly for business," the woman from 1B said, approaching them. "I was appalled by that flight attendant's behavior from the beginning of the flight. I should have said something sooner." "You did speak up eventually," Zoe acknowledged. "That matters." As Zoe finally stepped off the aircraft, the relief was palpable. The recycled air of the cabin was replaced by the slightly musty atmosphere of the jet bridge, and ahead she could see the bright lights of the terminal where Dominic would be waiting. Each step took her further from the confined space where she had been demeaned and assaulted, closer to the sanctuary of home and the strength of her husband's unwavering support. Behind her on the aircraft, Diane Miller sat in the jump seat, her career and reputation disintegrating with each passing minute as the machinery of corporate crisis management engaged around her. What had begun as subtle discrimination had escalated to an indefensible assault captured on video witnessed by a cabin full of passengers against the wife of the company's chairman. There would be no explaining this away, no union protection strong enough to shield her from the consequences. In a moment of unrestrained prejudice, she had not only violated the dignity of another human being, she had also destroyed the career that had defined her life for 25 years. And as the terminal door opened and Zoe caught sight of Dominic waiting, tall, imposing, radiating contained power in his perfectly tailored suit, she knew that the consequences were just beginning. Zoe. The single word contained multitudes as Dominic Jackson crossed the private lounge in 3 long strides, his eyes rapidly assessing his wife for any sign of distress or injury. At 40, he carried himself with the confident authority of a man accustomed to power his 6'3" frame, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that had been tailored to perfection. His dark skin contrasted sharply with the crisp white of his shirt, and his closely cropped hair was beginning to show the first distinguished touches of silver at the temples. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, intense, observant, missing nothing. They softened only when they fell on Zoe, the transformation immediate and striking. "I'm all right," she assured him, stepping into his embrace. Truly. His arms enfolded her, carefully mindful of her pregnancy, but there was a tension in his body that betrayed the control he was exercising over his anger. One hand gently touched her cheek where a faint redness still lingered from Diane's slap. "This should never have happened," he said quietly, the measured tone belying the cold fury beneath. "Not on my airline. Not to anyone, and certainly not to you." The private lounge reserved for Horizon's most elite passengers and executives had been cleared of all other occupants. Only Victoria Reynolds remained standing discreetly near the entrance tablet in hand, awaiting further instructions from the man who effectively controlled the company's destiny. Dominic guided Zoe to a plush leather sofa, ensuring she was comfortable before turning his attention to Victoria. "Tell me exactly what happened. Everything you know so far." Victoria's response was precise, efficient, the report of a seasoned executive who understood that her chairman wanted facts, not embellishment. Based on preliminary statements and available footage, Head Flight Attendant Diane Miller engaged in a pattern of discriminatory service toward Dr. Williams throughout the flight. This culminated in her physically striking Dr. Williams during landing when your wife attempted to use the lavatory due to pregnancy discomfort. Dominic's expression remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw tightened visibly. "The flight attendant struck my pregnant wife for needing to use the bathroom, after blocking her path and making a comment that witnesses have characterized as racially charged, yes," Victoria confirmed. "The incident was captured on video by a passenger in 3B Alexander Costa. We've already secured his footage and contact information, and the flight attendant." "Where is she now?" "Still on the aircraft with security present. She's being held for formal dismissal processing and potential transfer to Port Authority Police, depending on whether Dr. Williams wishes to press charges." Dominic turned to Zoe, the question implicit in his gaze. "I haven't decided yet," she answered honestly. "Part of me wants to see real consequences, but another part questions whether the criminal justice system is the right venue for addressing what's fundamentally a deeper issue." Dominic nodded, respecting her perspective, even as his own instinct clearly leaned toward the most severe consequences possible. He turned back to Victoria. "I want to speak with her." "With Ms. Miller?" Victoria clarified surprise, briefly breaking through her professional demeanor. "Yes. Have her brought here immediately. Ensure security remains present." Victoria hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, Mr. Jackson. I'll arrange it now." She stepped away to make the necessary calls, leaving Dominic and Zoe momentarily alone. "You don't have to do this," Zoe said softly, recognizing the cold determination in her husband's bearing. "The company can handle the disciplinary process without your direct involvement." Dominic took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her wedding ring. "This isn't just about discipline, Zoe. This is about understanding what's happening in my company, What's happening right under my nose while I issue grand statements about dignity and respect? He shook his head, self-recrimination evident in the gesture. I've been so focused on the big-picture fleet modernization route expansion service protocols that I missed the human element. The culture that allows someone like Diane Miller to feel entitled to treat passengers differently based on how they look. You can't personally screen every employee for prejudice, Dominic. No, he agreed, but I can ensure that when it manifests, the response is unequivocal, and I can use this incident to drive change throughout the organization. Victoria returned before Zoe could respond. Ms. Miller is being escorted here now. Our legal counsel advises that since this may lead to criminal charges, we should have a witness present for any conversation. You'll serve as witness, Dominic decided, and record the entire exchange. Within minutes, the lounge door opened again, and Diane Miller was escorted in by 2 security officers. The transformation in her appearance from the confident authoritarian presence who had commanded the first-class cabin was striking. Her posture was diminished, her face pale, her hands visibly trembling. Her uniform, once worn with such pride, now seemed to hang on her frame like a costume she no longer had the right to wear. Her eyes darted around the luxurious lounge before settling on Dominic, recognition dawning as she connected his face with the portraits she had seen in company materials and news articles. Then her gaze shifted to Zoe sitting beside him, and the last pieces fell into place. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Ms. Miller, Dominic began, his voice deceptively conversational. "Do you know who I am?" Diane swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. You're Dominic Jackson, chairman of Horizon Airways. And do you know who this is?" He gestured to Zoe. Your wife, sir." The words were barely audible. "Dr. Zoe Williams Jackson," he confirmed. "Chief of Pediatric Cardiothoracic Surgery at New York Presbyterian. My wife, the mother of my unborn child, and a passenger on your flight today, who you subjected to discriminatory treatment before physically assaulting her." Diane's face crumpled slightly at the direct accusation. "Sir, I can explain." "Can you—" Dominic interrupted, his tone hardening. "Can you explain why you questioned my wife's seat assignment when she boarded? Why you denied her an extra pillow for her pregnancy discomfort? Why you skipped her during meal service? Why you blocked her path to the lavatory during landing? Or why most inexplicably you felt entitled to put your hands on her?" Each question landed like a precise blow, cataloging the pattern of behavior that couldn't be dismissed as a single momentary lapse. "It was a misunderstanding," Diane attempted, her voice trembling. "A series of misunderstandings. The flight was full, service was busy, and during landing all passengers are required to remain seated." "Ms. Miller." Zoe interjected, her calm voice creating a stark contrast to Dominic's controlled intensity. "Let's be honest with each other. This wasn't about service procedures or safety protocols. From the moment I boarded, you treated me differently from other first-class passengers. The question is why?" Diane's gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet Zoe's direct, compassionate inquiry. "Was it because I'm black?" Zoe pressed gently. "Because I didn't fit your image of who belongs in first class?" The directness of the question hung in the air, demanding acknowledgement of what everyone in the room knew to be true. It wasn't." Diane struggled, then finally surrendered to the truth. "You didn't seem like a regular first-class passenger. You weren't dressed like the others, didn't have the same presence. I assumed you'd been upgraded or used points, that you didn't really belong there. And if I had been upgraded or used points," Zoe asked, "would that have justified treating me with less respect than other passengers?" "No," Diane admitted, her voice small. "But first class has standards, protocols. When people aren't familiar with them, it disrupts the service for everyone. What specific protocol did my wife violate?" Dominic inquired, his tone dangerously quiet. What rule did she break that justified putting your hands on her? Diane had no answer for this, the indefensibility of her actions hanging in the stark silence. 25 years, she finally said, her voice breaking. I've given this airline 25 years of my life. I've worked through holidays, missed my mother's funeral for a transatlantic route, developed varicose veins from standing for thousands of hours. And what do I have to show for it? A pension that's been cut in half, younger colleagues promoted over me, and now this one mistake that erases everything. One mistake, Dominic repeated, incredulous. Ms. Miller, what happened today wasn't one mistake. It was the culmination of a pattern of discriminatory behavior that you yourself just acknowledged. You didn't see my wife as belonging in first class because of how she looked, and you treated her accordingly. Victoria, who had been silently recording the exchange, spoke up. Miss Miller, to be clear, striking a passenger under any circumstances is immediate grounds for termination under company policy. The discriminatory behavior that preceded it compounds the severity of the violation. Diane looked from face to face, searching for any sign of sympathy, and finding none. The gravity of her situation, the irrevocable destruction of her career, the potential legal consequences, the public humiliation that would likely follow settled on her with crushing force. What happens now? She asked, her voice hollow. Dominic stood straightening to his full imposing height. Now, Ms. Miller, you have choices to make. Dr. Williams has not yet decided whether to press criminal charges for assault. That's her decision, and I will respect whatever she chooses. He began to pace slowly, his movements measured and deliberate. As for your employment with Horizon Airways, that ended the moment you struck my wife. You will surrender your credentials and uniform before leaving this building. Your final paycheck will be processed according to union guidelines, but there will be no severance package, no letter of recommendation, no possibility of rehiring in any capacity. The clinical precision with which he outlined the dissolution of her career seemed to affect Diane more deeply than any shouting could have. This was not emotional retaliation, but cold corporate consequence, the dismantling of her professional identity piece by systematic piece. The union, she began weakly. Your union representative has already been briefed, Victoria interjected. Given the video evidence and witness statements they've indicated, they will not contest the termination. Assault of a passenger is indefensible under your contract terms. Diane's last hope of protection crumbled. She sank further into herself, a woman watching the pillars of her life collapse in real time. Zoe, who had been observing quietly, finally spoke again. Ms. Miller, I'd like to ask you something, and I hope you'll answer honestly. Her tone remained measured, professional, the voice of a surgeon accustomed to difficult conversations. If you had known who I was when I boarded, if you had recognized me as Dominic Jackson's wife, would you have treated me the same way? The question pierced through the room, its implication unavoidable. It wasn't just about Diane's behavior, but about the conditional nature of respect in their society, how dignity was extended or withheld based on perceived status, wealth, or power. Diane looked up, meeting Zoe's eyes directly for perhaps the first time. No. She admitted the single syllable laden with shame. I would have treated you like a VIP, which means you're capable of providing respectful service when you believe someone deserves it, Zoe observed. The issue isn't your ability, it's your judgment about who is worthy of basic dignity. The assessment was delivered without rancor, but with unflinching clarity that made it impossible to deny. I never thought of myself as prejudiced, Diane said softly. I have black colleagues I respect, Hispanic friends I socialize with. But today, her voice trailed off as she confronted the unmistakable evidence of her own bias. Few people think of themselves as prejudiced, Zoe replied. That's what makes it so insidious. It operates below the surface in the small decisions, the instinctive reactions, the assumptions we don't even realize we're making. Dominic, who had been listening intently to this exchange, turned to Victoria. Have security escort Ms. Miller to HR for processing. Ensure she surrenders all company property and credentials before leaving the building. Victoria nodded, gesturing to the security officers who moved forward to escort Diane out. Before they reached her, Zoe spoke once more. Ms. Miller, I haven't decided yet about pressing charges. I'll need time to consider what serves justice best in this situation. Her hand rested protectively on her belly as she added, Whatever happens, I hope today becomes a moment of reflection rather than just retribution. Diane looked at her with a mixture of shame, fear, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Then, with security flanking her, she was led from the lounge, the door closing behind her with quiet finality. In the silence that followed, Dominic returned to Zoe's side, taking her hand in his. You continue to amaze me, he said softly. After what she did, you still managed to see her humanity. That's precisely why her behavior was so painful, Zoe replied. She failed to see mine. Victoria cleared her throat discreetly. Mr. Jackson, we have a car waiting whenever you and Dr. Williams are ready to leave. I've also prepared a preliminary crisis management plan for your review, including media strategy and internal communications. Dominic nodded. Thank you, Victoria. Have it sent to my office. I'll review it tonight. He turned to Zoe. Let's get you home. You've had more than enough stress for one day. As they prepared to leave, Dominic's phone chimed with an incoming message. He glanced at it, his expression darkening slightly. What is it? Zoe asked. Alexander Costa has already uploaded a clip of the incident to social media. It's starting to gain traction. He showed her the screen where a brief video captured the moment Diane had slapped her, followed by the shocked reactions of nearby passengers. I suppose it was inevitable. Zoe sighed. Everything becomes public now, which means we need to respond proactively rather than reactively. Dominic said, his strategic mind already shifting to damage control mode. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one incident anymore. It's about Horizon's culture, values, and accountability. As they left the lounge, escorted by security through private corridors to avoid the main terminal, Zoe reflected on the strange, sad symmetry of the situation. Diane Miller had judged her unworthy of respect based on appearance, only to discover too late that Zoe wielded more influence than anyone else on that aircraft. It was the same pattern that had played out countless times throughout her life and career, the initial dismissal followed by the recalibration when her credentials or connections became known. The conditional respect that was extended not because of her inherent dignity as a human being, but because of what she had achieved or who she knew. And as they stepped into the waiting car, Dominic already making calls to assemble his crisis team. Zoe placed a protective hand over her unborn son and wondered what world he would inherit and what role today's events might play in shaping it, however slightly, for the better. The video has just crossed 1 million views. Victoria Reynolds's voice was clinically detached as she updated Dominic and Zoe, who were seated in the spacious rear office of their Central Park West penthouse. It was 9:47 p.m., just 5 hours after the incident on Flight 217, and what had begun as a private confrontation had exploded into a viral sensation that was rapidly becoming a corporate crisis. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. It's everywhere. Victoria continued scrolling through her tablet. Alexander Costa's original clip has been reposted by several major news outlets and social justice accounts. #Horizon Assault and #Flying. While black are trending nationally. Dominic stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering expanse of Central Park, his reflection superimposed over the nighttime vista. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing powerful forearms and the subtle gleam of a platinum watch, the only piece of jewelry he consistently wore besides his wedding band. "What's the public response trajectory?" he asked, his tone measured. Victoria had been with Horizon Airways since before Dominic's acquisition, one of the few executives he'd retained during the restructuring. At 45, she had navigated countless corporate crises with unflappable efficiency, and Dominic trusted her assessment implicitly, escalating rapidly. Initial shock and outrage is transitioning to demands for accountability. Several civil rights organizations have released statements. Competitor airlines are carefully distancing themselves while implicitly positioning their diversity initiatives. Social media sentiment is running approximately 95% against Horizon, with particular focus on whether this represents a broader cultural issue rather than an isolated incident. From across the room, Zoe spoke up. "Have there been any statements from flight attendant unions or aviation industry groups?" Victoria nodded. The Flight Attendants Association released a statement an hour ago condemning any form of passenger assault while emphasizing that Ms. Miller's actions don't represent the professionalism of the vast majority of flight attendants. They've specifically noted they won't be defending her actions through union grievance procedures. "Small mercies," Dominic murmured, turning from the window. "What about Diane Miller? Any public statement from her or representatives?" "Nothing yet. Our security team escorted her from the building after processing her termination. She declined to speak with waiting reporters. No attorney has contacted our legal department yet. And the other witnesses? Passengers from first class. Most have provided formal statements which have been logged by our legal team. Several have also spoken to media outlets. The consensus narrative aligns with what we already know, a pattern of discriminatory service culminating in physical assault." From a side table, Dominic picked up a crystal tumbler containing 2 fingers of scotch, his first and only drink of the evening. He took a measured sip before speaking again. "We need to get ahead of this, not just respond to it. Victoria drafted a comprehensive corporate statement acknowledging what happened, expressing unequivocal support for Zoe, and outlining immediate actions we're taking. I want it on my desk within the hour." "Of course," Victoria replied, making notes on her tablet. "Will you be making a personal statement as well? The media is particularly interested in your dual role as both chairman and husband of the victim." Dominic glanced at Zoe, seeking her input. She had been remarkably composed throughout the ordeal, but he was acutely aware of the physical and emotional toll it was taking on her. "I think you should," Zoe said, answering his unspoken question. "Not just as my husband or as Horizon's chairman, but as someone with the platform to address why this matters beyond one incident on one flight." He nodded, accepting her wisdom as he so often did in matters requiring nuance rather than decisive action. "Draft something for that as well. I'll review and personalize it." Victoria made additional notes before continuing with her briefing. "The executive team is assembled at headquarters awaiting your direction. Legal has prepared preliminary documentation if Dr. Williams decides to press charges. HR has initiated a comprehensive review of Diane Miller's employment history looking for previous complaints or incidents. And our diversity and inclusion team is standing by to implement whatever initiatives you deem appropriate." "Good," Dominic replied. "Tell the executive team I'll join via video conference in 30 minutes. I want everyone prepared to discuss not just crisis management but structural changes." As Victoria left to execute these directives, Dominic crossed the room to sit beside Zoe, in the privacy of their home away from corporate machinery and public scrutiny. His carefully maintained composure softened. He took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her palm. "How are you really doing?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. Zoe exhaled slowly, allowing herself to acknowledge the emotions she had been compartmentalizing since the incident. "Physically, I'm fine. The baby's movements have been normal. But emotionally..." She shook her head slightly. "It's complicated. There's anger, of course, humiliation, but also a deep sadness that after everything, my education, my career, our position, I can still be reduced to not belonging based on how I look. Dominic's expression darkened with shared understanding. Despite his immense wealth and power, he too had experienced the persistent sting of prejudice, the constant negotiation of spaces where his presence was questioned until his credentials were established. And now there's this added layer, Zoe continued, gesturing toward the tablet displaying the viral video. What happened to me is becoming a symbol, a rallying point. Part of me embraces that the possibility of creating change from this ugly moment. But another part just wants privacy to process this without becoming a hashtag or a case study in corporate diversity training. Whatever you want, that's what we'll do, Dominic assured her. If you want to press charges, we will. If you want to pursue civil action, we will. If you want to use this to drive change at Horizon, we will. And if you want to step back and let others handle it while you focus on yourself and our son, we can do that too. Zoe smiled, genuine appreciation warming her expression. That's why I love you. You always make it clear that I have choices. She placed her free hand on her belly where their son was actively moving. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about him too. The world he'll grow up in. I don't want to hide from this moment, I want to use it. Before Dominic could respond, his phone chimed with an urgent notification. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting subtly. Alexander Costa is giving a live interview on CNN right now. He reached for the remote, activating the wall-mounted television. The screen illuminated to show Alexander Costa speaking earnestly to a news anchor. The chyron beneath him read, Tech CEO films, flight attendant assaulting pregnant black passenger. Couldn't believe what I was seeing, Alexander was saying. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was the culmination of a pattern of behavior I'd been observing throughout the flight. The flight attendant consistently treated Dr. Williams differently from other first-class passengers. And you decided to record this because... The anchor prompted. Because I recognized what was happening, Alexander replied firmly. As a Latino man who's navigated predominantly white spaces in tech, I know what subtle discrimination looks like. It often goes undocumented, unaddressed, because it's a series of small slights rather than one dramatic incident. But in this case, it escalated to something that couldn't be explained away or denied. The anchor nodded. The video clearly shows the flight attendant striking Dr. Williams. What happened immediately after that shock? Complete shock throughout the cabin. Several passengers spoke up immediately, calling out what they'd seen. I made it clear I had recorded everything. The purser, a different flight attendant, came forward and took control of the situation, removing the assailant from direct contact with Dr. Williams. And did you know at the time who Dr. Williams was? That she's married to Dominic Jackson, who owns a significant portion of Horizon Airways? Alexander shook his head. No, I had no idea. I was just reacting to an injustice happening right in front of me. It wasn't until after landing, when corporate representatives boarded the plane, that I began to piece together that she must be someone important. But that's actually part of the problem, isn't it? The idea that you need to be someone important to deserve basic dignity and respect. Dominic nodded slightly, appreciating the man's insight. He gets it, he said quietly to Zoe. The interview continued, with Alexander providing a detailed account of what he had witnessed throughout the flight, the selective courtesy, the denied requests, the enforced policies that didn't seem to apply to white passengers. What would you like to see happen now? The anchor asked finally. Accountability, Alexander answered without hesitation. Not just for the individual flight attendant, but for the corporate culture that allowed her to feel empowered to act this way. And a broader conversation about how we address these everyday moments of discrimination that might not make headlines, but still cause real harm. As the interview concluded, Dominic muted the television and turned to Zoe. He's made some valid points about corporate culture. This isn't just about Diane Miller, it's about the environment that enabled her behavior. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The question hung in the air as Dominic's phone chimed again. a reminder of the pending video conference with his executive team. He stood straightening his shirt cuffs in a habitual gesture. I'm going to start by making it unequivocally clear that what happened today represents a failure at every level of our organization. Then I'm going to implement changes significant enough that no one can dismiss them as mere damage control. His voice had taken on the decisive tone that had made him so formidable in business. By the time I'm done, Horizon Airways will either become an industry leader in equity and inclusion, or I'll sell my stake and watch it collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. As he moved toward his home office for the video conference, Zoe called after him. Don't just react out of anger, Dominic. Make changes that will actually create lasting transformation, not just appease public outrage. He paused at the doorway, turning back with a slight smile. That's why I have you, Dr. Williams, to remind me that the goal isn't punishment, it's progress. Left alone in the living room, Zoe returned her attention to the muted television where the discussion had expanded to include a panel analyzing the implications of the incident. Her own face appeared on screen, a professional headshot from the hospital website, juxtaposed with a still frame from the viral video showing the moment of impact when Diane's hand connected with her cheek. The surreal quality of seeing herself as a news story, her private humiliation transformed into public discourse, wasn't lost on her. Yet beneath the discomfort was a growing resolve. If her experience was going to become a catalyst for change, she was determined to ensure that change was meaningful, not merely performative. From Dominic's office, she could hear his voice clear and authoritative as he addressed his executive team. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened today on Flight 2117 is unacceptable on every level. Not just the physical assault, which is obviously grounds for immediate termination, but the pattern of behavior that preceded it. This incident has exposed failures in our training, our monitoring systems, and our corporate culture. And starting tonight, we're going to address all of them. Zoe placed both hands on her belly, feeling their son's movements beneath her palms. Your father's on a mission now, she whispered, and when he sets his mind to something, the world tends to move out of his way. Outside the penthouse windows, New York City continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware that in offices and newsrooms across the metropolis, the story of what had happened on Flight 217 was being shaped into headlines, analysis, and commentary that would greet the city's residents in the morning. For Diane Miller, the night brought a different reality alone in her Queens apartment, watching her name and face appear on news channels, her career and reputation disintegrating in real time, the consequences of her actions expanding far beyond what she could have imagined when she'd reported for duty that morning. And in corporate headquarters across town, Horizon executives were hurriedly developing action plans, preparing statements, and bracing for what promised to be a defining moment in the company's history. The plane had landed, but the journey was far from over. Before I begin, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. What happened yesterday on Horizon Airways Flight 217 was not just a failure of one employee. It was a failure of our company culture, our training programs, and our accountability systems. Dominic Jackson stood at the podium in Horizon Airways corporate headquarters press briefing room, his imposing presence commanding the attention of the assembled journalists and cameras. The room was packed to capacity with representatives from every major network and publication jostling for position. Behind him, a large screen displayed the company logo, a stylized horizon line that had been designed to evoke limitless possibility. Today, it felt like an ironic backdrop to a corporation facing very tangible limitations in its approach to human dignity. As both chairman of Horizon Airways and husband of Dr. Zoe Williams, I find myself in a unique position. Dominic continued, his voice steady and measured. I am simultaneously responsible for the company whose employee committed this act and personally connected to the woman who experienced it. He paused, letting the dual perspective sink in before continuing. But I want to be clear that my response today is not driven primarily by personal connection. It is driven by a fundamental belief that what happened represents a violation of our most basic corporate values and human principles. The cameras flashed continuously as he spoke, capturing images that would be splashed across websites, newspapers, and television screens around the country within minutes. For those who haven't seen the video or read the reports, here is what occurred. My wife, Dr. Zoe Williams, a distinguished cardiothoracic surgeon who is 7 months pregnant, was subjected to discriminatory treatment throughout her flight. When she needed to use the lavatory during landing due to pregnancy discomfort, she was not only denied this basic human necessity, she was physically struck by our head flight attendant Diane Miller for attempting to address her own medical needs. Dominic's expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could detect the controlled anger beneath his professional veneer. The flight attendant in question has been terminated effective immediately, but terminating one employee does not address the underlying issues that allowed this incident to occur. It does not answer the question of why a Horizon employee felt empowered to profile, discriminate against, and ultimately assault a passenger based on her appearance. He straightened slightly, squaring his shoulders as he prepared to announce the unprecedented measure that had sent shockwaves through the airline industry overnight. Therefore, effective 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, Horizon Airways will ground its entire fleet for 24 hours. Every aircraft, every route worldwide. A ripple of murmurs spread through the press corps. Even those who had heard rumors of this dramatic step seemed surprised by its confirmation. During this period, all customer-facing employees, from flight attendants to gate agents to customer service representatives, will participate in mandatory training focused not just on diversity and inclusion, but on the specific ways bias manifests in service interactions. This training will be conducted by external experts in anti-discrimination practices and will be the first step in a comprehensive overhaul of our approach to service equity. In the audience, some journalists were already frantically typing on their phones, breaking the news of this extraordinary development to their editors. The financial implications alone were staggering: a day's worth of canceled flights, compensation claims, and logistical costs that would run into tens of millions of dollars. Additionally, Dominic continued, we are establishing a service equity division within Horizon Airways, tasked specifically with monitoring, measuring, and improving service consistency across all passenger demographics. This division will employ a combination of mystery shoppers, data analytics, and direct passenger feedback to identify and address potential disparities in how different passengers are treated. He went on to outline further concrete measures, revising hiring and promotion criteria to prioritize emotional intelligence and cultural competence, implementing anonymous testing to identify service disparities, and creating a diverse external advisory board to guide ongoing improvements. The cost of these measures, including the fleet grounding, will exceed $50 million, he acknowledged frankly. But there is no price tag on human dignity. There is no acceptable financial calculation that justifies treating any passenger as less worthy of respect based on their appearance. As he spoke, information crawled across the bottom of television screens nationwide. Unprecedented Horizon Airways to ground entire fleet for anti-discrimination training, and Airline takes dramatic action after assault on CEO's wife. Seated in the front row, Zoe watched her husband with quiet pride. She had arrived just minutes before the press conference began, still wearing her professional attire from the hospital. Despite her pregnancy fatigue and the emotional strain of the past 24 hours, she projected calm strength, the same quality that made her exceptional in the operating room. Dominic had moved to the question and answer portion of the press conference. Mr. Jackson called out a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. Critics are already suggesting that this dramatic response is only happening because the passenger involved was your wife. Would Horizon be taking the same measures if the victim had been an ordinary traveler with no connection to ownership? It was the question Dominic had been expecting, the obvious challenge to the sincerity and depth of Horizon's commitment. He didn't flinch from it. That's a fair question, he acknowledged, and I can't prove a counterfactual. What I can tell you is this. The fact that such an incident could occur on my airline under my leadership indicates a failure that extends far beyond one employee or one passenger. It reveals gaps in our culture and our systems that would exist regardless of who experienced their impact. He leaned slightly forward, his gaze intense. But I would also ask us to reflect on the uncomfortable truth this question exposes. Why do we assume that corporations only take decisive action when the victims of mistreatment are powerful or connected? Why have we normalized a world where dignity and respect seem to be conditional privileges rather than universal rights? That's precisely the mentality we need to change, not just at Horizon, but throughout our society. The reporter nodded, seemingly satisfied with the thoughtful response. Another hand shot up, a correspondent from CNN. You mentioned that the flight attendant Diane Miller has been terminated. Are you concerned about potential backlash from the flight attendants' union, particularly given this morning's protests where several crew members expressed concerns about collective blame? I respect our flight attendants' right to express their perspectives, Dominic replied. The vast majority provide excellent professional service to all passengers regardless of background. This isn't about vilifying an entire workforce, it's about addressing specific behaviors and the conditions that enable them. He paused before adding, As for union concerns regarding Ms. Miller's termination, I should note that union leadership has already indicated they will not contest this action. Physical assault of a passenger is indefensible under any circumstances and constitutes clear grounds for immediate dismissal under their contract terms. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, ranging from logistical details of the fleet grounding to broader inquiries about industry-wide discrimination. Throughout, Dominic maintained his composed, direct approach, neither minimizing the severity of the incident nor allowing it to be framed as merely a personal grievance. As the press conference was drawing to a close, a reporter directed a question to Zoe. Dr. Williams, may I ask, how do you feel about the company's response to what happened to you? Dominic turned to Zoe, silently offering her the podium if she wished to speak. After a moment's consideration, she rose and approached the microphone. What happened yesterday was deeply troubling, but unfortunately not entirely surprising. She began, her voice clear and measured. As a black woman who has navigated predominantly white professional spaces throughout my career, I've experienced many forms of discrimination, some subtle, some overt, but all damaging in their cumulative impact. The room had grown completely silent, captivated by her calm eloquence. What gives me hope about Horizon's response is not just the decisive action, but the recognition that this isn't about a single bad apple or an isolated incident. It's about examining the soil in which that apple grew, the unspoken assumptions, the tacit permissions, the patterns of behavior that go unchallenged until they escalate to the point of crisis. She paused, her hand resting lightly on her belly, a subtle but powerful visual reminder of the stakes involved. I believe that what happened on that flight can either be just another viral outrage that fades when the next scandal hits, or it can be a catalyst for genuine reflection and change. My hope is for the latter, not just at Horizon Airways, but throughout our society, where the dignity of each person is recognized and respected regardless of how they look, where they come from, or who they know. With that, she stepped back from the podium, her brief but powerful statement leaving a profound impression on the assembled journalists. Victoria Reynolds approached the podium to announce that Dominic would be taking no further questions, but that detailed information packets outlining Horizon's action plan were available for all attending journalists. As they left the briefing room, escorted by security through a private corridor to avoid the main lobby where protesters and additional media had gathered, Dominic took Zoe's hand. "That was perfect," he said quietly. "You shifted the focus from corporate policy to human impact. That's what people needed to hear." Zoe nodded, squeezing his hand in response. "It's what I needed to say for myself and for all the others who experience these moments without cameras rolling or powerful spouses to advocate for them." Meanwhile, across town, Diane Miller sat in stunned silence as she watched the press conference on her small television. The scale of Horizon's response, grounding an entire global fleet, was beyond anything she had anticipated. It transformed her actions from a momentary loss of control into a corporate-defining crisis that would be studied in business schools and cited in discrimination lawsuits for years to come. The realization brought with it a crushing weight of consequence far beyond the loss of her job or potential legal penalties. She had become a cautionary tale, a case study in how unconscious bias could manifest in destructive behavior with far-reaching implications. With trembling hands, she reached for the phone and dialed the number provided in the manila envelope. When the receptionist at the Center for Racial Justice and Reconciliation answered, Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. "My name is Diane Miller. I need to enroll in your program. All rise." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Michael Harrington entered his robes, swishing softly as he took his place behind the bench. The proceedings today were not a trial, but a sentencing hearing, the culmination of a legal process that had begun 3 months after the incident on Flight 217. Diane Miller stood beside her attorney, Harold Weiss, her appearance dramatically transformed from her days as a Horizon Airways head flight attendant. The crisp uniform had been replaced by a modest navy blue suit that hung slightly loose on her frame. Her once immaculate blonde bun had given way to a simpler style, streaks of gray, now visible, that had previously been meticulously colored. But the most striking change was in her bearing, the authoritative posture replaced by a wary, diminished presence. 2 weeks earlier, she had pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault, a negotiated charge that acknowledged the physical contact while avoiding the more serious felony assault of a pregnant woman that the district attorney had initially considered. Ms. Miller, Judge Harrington began reviewing the file before him. "You have pleaded guilty to assault in the 3rd degree regarding an incident that occurred on Horizon Airways Flight 217. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to address the court?" Diane nodded, rising slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the defense table. "Your Honor." She began, her voice softer than the commanding tone she had once used to direct first-class passengers. "I want to express my profound regret for my actions that day. There is no justification for striking another person, especially a pregnant woman." She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. "For 25 years I took pride in my professionalism. But on that day I failed, not just in my duties, but as a human being. I've spent these past months reflecting on why I acted as I did, confronting biases I didn't want to acknowledge." Her gaze shifted briefly to where Zoe sat in the gallery, now in her 9th month of pregnancy. "Dr. Williams, I am deeply sorry for the pain and humiliation I caused you. What I did was inexcusable, and no amount of explanation about stress or safety protocols changes that fact." Judge Harrington nodded, then turned his attention to Zoe. "Dr. Williams, you've submitted a victim impact statement which I've reviewed. Would you like to address the court as well?" Zoe rose carefully, one hand supporting her lower back as she approached the podium. At 9 months pregnant, her movements were deliberate, her physical presence a vivid reminder of her condition when the assault occurred. "Your Honor, thank you for the opportunity to speak," she began, her voice steady and clear. The physical impact of Ms. Miller's actions was fortunately minimal. My son and I suffered no lasting physical harm. She paused, her hand resting protectively over her rounded belly. The psychological impact, however, was more significant. Not because of the slap itself, but because of what it represented, a moment when my humanity was so thoroughly dismissed that physical aggression became acceptable in the mind of someone charged with ensuring passenger welfare. Her gaze met Diane's directly for the first time since the incident. "I don't believe Ms. Miller's actions that day defined her entire character or career. I do believe they reflected biases that exist throughout our society. biases that often operate below the level of conscious awareness until they manifest in moments of stress or conflict. She turned back to the judge. In my victim impact statement, I requested that any sentence focus on rehabilitation and education rather than purely punitive measures. I continue to believe that approach best serves justice in this case. Judge Harrington thanked her and spent several minutes reviewing the case materials before delivering his decision. Ms. Miller assault is never acceptable, particularly when committed by someone in a position of authority against a person in a vulnerable state. However, I have taken into account your previously unblemished record, your guilty plea, and Dr. Williams's thoughtful recommendation. He straightened slightly, his expression stern but not unkind. I hereby sentence you to 6 months probation, during which you will complete 200 hours of community service at the Center for Racial Justice and Reconciliation. You will also participate in their bias recognition and management program for the duration of your probation. The sentence was essentially what both legal teams had negotiated, a resolution that acknowledged the seriousness of the offense while creating a path for education and redemption rather than mere punishment. As the proceedings concluded, Diane was escorted from the courtroom by her attorney, avoiding the cluster of reporters waiting outside. Zoe remained seated as the courtroom cleared, allowing the media frenzy to dissipate before making her own exit. "Are you satisfied with the outcome?" Dominic asked quietly, sitting beside her. Zoe considered the question. "I think it's appropriate. Incarceration wouldn't have addressed the underlying issues, and a mere fine would have trivialized them. This approach at least creates the possibility for genuine reflection and change." Outside the courthouse, spring had arrived in New York City. The trees lining the streets were budding with new growth, a fitting metaphor for the transformations that had occurred in the 3 months since the incident. At Horizon Airways, the 24-hour fleet grounding had indeed taken place, costing millions, but sending an unmistakable message about the company's commitment to addressing bias. Every customer-facing employee had participated in intensive training on recognizing and countering unconscious prejudice in service interactions. The actual training sessions had been eye-opening for many employees. Rather than the generic corporate diversity seminars many had expected, the program had been specifically tailored to address the subtle ways bias manifests in service environments. Role-playing exercises had placed employees in situations where they might unconsciously treat passengers differently based on appearance, and real-world examples, including carefully anonymized footage from Flight 217, had been used to illustrate how discrimination often operates through small, seemingly innocuous decisions, rather than overt bigotry. For some veteran employees, the sessions had been uncomfortable, even threatening. A handful had resigned, rather than participate, declaring the training political correctness gone mad or reverse discrimination. But the majority had engaged sincerely, many expressing surprise at recognizing patterns in their own behavior they had never previously examined. More significantly, Dominic had established the Service Equity Division, a new department specifically tasked with monitoring, measuring, and improving service consistency across passenger demographics. Headed by Victoria Reynolds, who had been promoted to Executive Vice President, the division employed mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds to regularly evaluate the passenger experience throughout the Horizon network. The findings from the first quarter of evaluations had been sobering. Despite the intensive training, measurable disparities still existed in service quality between white passengers and passengers of color, particularly in first and business class. But unlike before, these disparities were now being tracked, analyzed, and addressed through targeted interventions. The changes extended beyond Horizon to impact the broader industry. The viral nature of the incident had prompted the Federal Aviation Administration to launch a comprehensive review of discrimination in air travel, resulting in new guidelines for airlines nationwide. Several major carriers, recognizing the potential financial and reputational risks of similar incidents, had proactively implemented their own enhanced training programs. For Diane Miller, the consequences had been life-altering in every sense. Beyond losing her career and facing legal proceedings, she had experienced a social death of sorts, friends and former colleagues distancing themselves, her reputation permanently tarnished by the viral video that would likely remain her primary identity in the public consciousness. The financial impact had been equally devastating. Unable to secure employment in commercial aviation or any customer service role, she had been forced to sell her Queens apartment to cover legal fees and living expenses. She now rented a small studio in a less desirable neighborhood, relying on part-time administrative work that barely covered her basic needs. Yet, amid these hardships, there were signs of genuine transformation. Her participation in the Center for Racial Justice and Reconciliation's program had initially been approached as merely a requirement of her plea deal, a box to check to avoid more severe consequences. But something unexpected had happened during the intensive workshops and community service components. In one particularly powerful session, participants were required to examine specific incidents where they had engaged in discriminatory behavior and trace the underlying assumptions that had informed their actions. When Diane's turn came, she had begun with rehearsed contrition, but as she spoke, something shifted. The performative apology gave way to a rawer, more honest recognition of the prejudices she had carried throughout her career. Prejudices about who belonged in premium spaces, about whose comfort mattered, about whose humanity deserved full acknowledgement. I believed I was just maintaining standards, she admitted to the group, her voice catching. But I was actually appointing myself as the gatekeeper of who deserved dignity. And I made those judgments based on appearance, on how people looked and dressed, on whether they matched my mental image of first class. I never called it racism, even to myself. I called it intuition or experience. But when I look back now, I can see exactly what it was. It wasn't a Hollywood transformation, no dramatic moment of complete redemption or tearful reconciliation. Rather, it was the slow, often painful work of recognizing patterns of thought so deeply ingrained they had seemed like objective reality rather than subjective bias. As she continued her community service hours, working primarily with youth programs in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods, she began to see her former passengers as complete human beings rather than categories to be managed. The changes were gradual, imperfect, but genuine, evident in small moments of self-awareness and reflection that would have been impossible for the Diane Miller who had boarded Flight 217 that fateful day. Meanwhile, at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Zoe had reduced her surgical schedule as her due date approached. The incident on Flight 217 had unexpectedly thrust her into a public role she hadn't sought, but had ultimately embraced. She had given a limited number of interviews, focusing not on her personal experience, but on the broader patterns of discrimination it exemplified. "What happened to me was captured on video and went viral because of who my husband is," she told an interviewer from The Atlantic. But similar incidents happen every day to people without those advantages, and their experiences are often dismissed, minimized, or explained away. The question isn't why my case received attention, it's why all the others don't. Her perspective had resonated widely, drawing attention to the countless everyday indignities faced by people of color in spaces where their presence was unexpected or questioned. She had received thousands of messages from individuals sharing their own experiences of being made to feel they didn't belong in first-class cabins, exclusive restaurants, luxury stores, academic institutions, and corporate boardrooms. Rather than becoming overwhelmed by these stories, Zoe had seen them as an opportunity to create something meaningful. Working with colleagues from medicine, academia, and social justice organizations, she had established the Dignity Initiative, a nonprofit focused on documenting and addressing everyday discrimination in service environments. The initial funding had come from Dominic, but the organization had quickly attracted support from other corporate leaders and foundations who recognized both the moral imperative and the business case for ensuring equitable treatment across customer demographics. The goal isn't just to change individual behaviors, Zoe explained at the initiative's launch. It's to transform the systems and structures that enable those behaviors, to create environments where dignity is the default, not a privilege extended only to those who match a particular image of who belongs. For Dominic, the aftermath of Flight 217 had brought both professional challenges and personal growth. The fleet grounding had indeed cost Horizon Airways nearly $60 million, exceeding even the most pessimistic projections, and the company's stock had initially plummeted by 15%. Several institutional investors had quietly expressed concerns about his emotional decision-making, suggesting that his personal connection to the incident had clouded his business judgment. But as the quarters passed, an unexpected pattern emerged. Customer satisfaction ratings, which had dipped immediately following the disruption of the fleet grounding, began to climb steadily. Passenger surveys showed increased trust in Horizon's commitment to equitable service. Social media sentiment analysis revealed a marked improvement in brand perception, particularly among younger demographics and communities of color. By the 6-month mark, Horizon's stock had not only recovered, but exceeded its pre-incident value. Industry analysts were reluctantly acknowledging that what had initially seemed like a costly overreaction was increasingly looking like a savvy long-term investment in brand reputation and customer loyalty. More personally, the incident had deepened Dominic's understanding of the everyday experiences that shaped Zoe's navigation of the world. Despite his own experiences with racism as a successful black businessman, he had been stunned by the casual cruelty of Diane Miller's treatment of his wife, and by how unsurprised Zoe had been by it. "I've always seen you as extraordinary," he told her one evening as they prepared the nursery for their son's imminent arrival. "And you are. But I think I sometimes forgot that the world doesn't always see that first. Sometimes it just sees a black woman who doesn't match their expectations of who should occupy certain spaces." Zoe had smiled sadly, arranging tiny clothes in the dresser drawer. "That's why what you did with Horizon matters so much, not just for me, but for all the others who don't have someone who can ground a fleet or command a press conference when they're mistreated." As the due date approached, both Zoe and Dominic found themselves reflecting on the world their son would enter, a world still grappling with prejudice and bias, but perhaps with slightly more accountability, slightly more awareness than existed before. And when James William Jackson finally arrived on a bright spring morning, exactly 3 months after the incident on Flight 217, his parents made a quiet promise to ensure that he would grow up understanding both the realities of the world and his power to change it. Welcome aboard Horizon Airways Flight 115 to San Francisco. On behalf of Captain Davis and our entire crew, we're delighted to have you with us today. The voice over the intercom was warm and professional as passengers settled into their seats aboard the Airbus A350 Horizon's flagship aircraft. In the first-class cabin, a diverse mix of travelers arranged their belongings in preparation for the 6-hour transcontinental journey. Among them was Zoe Williams Jackson, seated in Suite 2A, with 10-month-old James, secured in a specially designed infant seat beside her. The baby's eyes were wide with curiosity, taking in the unfamiliar environment with the unfiltered wonder unique to children discovering the world for the first time. "Dr. Williams, welcome back," greeted Maria Gonzalez, the head flight attendant for today's service. "Is there anything special you or James need for the flight? An extra pillow would be wonderful," Zoe replied with a smile. "And perhaps some warm water for his bottle about an hour after takeoff." "Of course," Maria responded, making a note on her tablet. "I'll bring those right away. And please don't hesitate to press the call button if you need anything else at all." As Maria moved on to welcome other passengers, Zoe observed the interaction with professional interest. This wasn't just any flight, it was her first time traveling in first class since the incident a year ago, and she had chosen to do so as part of Horizon's Service Equity Audit Program. Unknown to the flight crew, Zoe was one of several experience evaluators on this flight, passengers specifically selected to assess service consistency across demographic categories. The program, implemented as part of Dominic's comprehensive overhaul of Horizon's approach to passenger experience, employed individuals from diverse backgrounds to travel on the airline and provide detailed reports on their treatment. Zoe's assignment was not to seek preferential treatment, but to evaluate whether service standards remained consistent for all passengers regardless of appearance, age, race, or other characteristics. Similar evaluators were positioned throughout the aircraft from first class to economy, each with specific metrics to observe and document. As boarding continued, Zoe noticed a young black woman being escorted to Suite 3A across the aisle, another evaluator, though they would maintain the fiction of being strangers throughout the flight. The woman settled into her suite with the ease of someone accustomed to premium travel, arranged her designer handbag beside her, and accepted a pre-departure beverage from Maria with a polite nod. The subtle choreography of the evaluation program was one of many changes Dominic had implemented in the years since the incident. The Service Equity Division had grown into a department of 30 professionals dedicated to measuring, analyzing, and improving service consistency across the entire Horizon network. Their efforts extended beyond mere observation to include structural changes in hiring practices, training protocols, and performance metrics. Flight attendants were now evaluated not just on technical proficiency and customer satisfaction scores, but on consistency of service across diverse passengers, a metric that directly impacted compensation and promotion opportunities. The changes hadn't been implemented without resistance. Some employees had left uncomfortable with the heightened scrutiny or unwilling to adapt to new expectations. Others had embraced the transformation, recognizing it as an opportunity to address unconscious biases they hadn't previously acknowledged. Industry reaction had been similarly mixed. Some carriers had dismissed Horizon's initiatives as excessive or performative, while others had recognized the business advantage of leading on equity issues and implemented their own versions of the program. The Federal Aviation Administration had incorporated elements of Horizon's approach into its updated guidelines for passenger treatment, effectively establishing new baseline standards for the entire industry. As the final passengers boarded and the doors prepared to close, Zoe caught sight of a familiar face in the terminal. Elena Vasquez, now Senior Vice President of the Service Equity Division, observing the departure as part of her regular field assessment routine. Their eyes met briefly through the aircraft window, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. For Zoe, this flight represented more than just a professional evaluation or personal milestone. It was a tangible manifestation of how a single incident, however painful, could catalyze meaningful change when addressed with intention and commitment rather than mere damage control. Little James gurgled happily beside her, completely unaware of his role in the transformation unfolding around him. He would grow up in a world still grappling with prejudice and bias, but perhaps with slightly more accountability, slightly more awareness than existed before. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway, Zoe reflected on the varied journeys that had emerged from that fateful flight a year earlier. Diane Miller had completed her probation and community service, maintaining a low profile as she rebuilt her life away from the aviation industry. Through mutual connections, Zoe had heard that Diane was now working at a small accounting firm and continuing her participation in bias education programs not as a court requirement, but as a personal choice, a small but significant indicator of genuine change. Alexander Costa had leveraged his tech platform to develop tools for measuring service equity in digital environments, extending the conversation beyond physical spaces like airplanes and hotels to online customer experiences. His company now offered analytics that helped businesses identify and address digital discrimination in everything from customer service algorithms to user interface design. Victoria Reynolds had been recognized as Executive of the Year by Women in Aviation International for her leadership of Horizon's transformation, becoming a sought-after speaker on corporate culture and equity initiatives. and Dominic had emerged with a newfound understanding of how his considerable influence could be leveraged not just for profit or personal advantage, but for structural change that rippled far beyond a single company or industry. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, lifting smoothly into the clear blue sky above New York. Beside Zoe, James laughed with delight at the sensation of flight, experiencing it with the pure joy of discovery. In that moment, watching her son embrace a new experience without preconception or judgment, Zoe found herself hopeful not just for his future but for the small, incremental changes that might shape the world he would inherit. The journey toward true equity was far from complete, but each step forward, however modest, created possibilities that hadn't existed before. The terminal at JFK International Airport bustled with the controlled chaos of modern air travel passengers rushing to gates, emotional reunions, and farewells announcements echoing through the vast space. Amid this activity, Zoe and James made their way toward the exit, the baby securely strapped to her chest in a carrier, his curious eyes taking in the kaleidoscope of humanity flowing around them. Williams. The voice came from behind, causing Zoe to turn and find herself face to face with Lucia Rodriguez, the junior flight attendant who had witnessed the assault a year earlier and later testified during the legal proceedings. "I thought it was you," Lucia continued, smiling at the sight of James. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "Of course I remember you, Lucia," Zoe replied warmly. "You were one of the few bright spots on that flight. How are you?" "I'm doing well," Lucia said, gesturing to her uniform, which now displayed the 3 stripes of a senior flight attendant. "I was promoted last month. I'm working with the new service training program now, alongside my regular flights." "Congratulations," Zoe said sincerely. "That's wonderful news." Lucia hesitated before adding, "Your husband's changes, they've made a real difference, not just in how we treat passengers, but in how we think about our responsibilities. It's changed the culture." "I'm glad to hear that," Zoe responded. That was the goal, not just policy changes, but a deeper shift in perspective. As they parted ways, Zoe continued toward the terminal exit where Dominic waited with their driver. The unexpected encounter with Lucia had prompted a moment of reflection on how the ripple effects of the incident had touched lives throughout the Horizon organization and beyond. "Successful evaluation?" Dominic asked as he helped secure James in his car seat. "Very," Zoe confirmed. The service was consistently excellent across all the evaluators regardless of appearance or demeanor. "Your metrics team will have my full report tomorrow, but the preliminary results are promising." As their car merged into the stream of traffic leaving the airport, the Manhattan skyline rose before them, a testament to human ambition and the complex social structures that both divided and connected the city's inhabitants. "I was thinking about something today," Zoe said, watching James drift toward sleep in his car seat. "About dignity and how conditional it often is." Dominic turned toward her, his expression attentive. Their conversations about race privilege and power had deepened over the past year, informed by their different experiences navigating predominantly white institutions and the new perspective of raising a son who would face his own journey through these complex waters. "On that flight a year ago," Zoe continued, "Diane Miller didn't see me as deserving of basic dignity until she discovered my connection to you. My worth was conditional on who I knew, not who I was." "A pattern you've experienced throughout your life," Dominic acknowledged. "And one that's painfully common for people of color," Zoe agreed. "The constant need to establish credentials to prove belonging to justify presence in spaces where others are presumed to belong by default." She glanced at James, peaceful in sleep, untroubled by the weight of history and expectation that would one day rest on his small shoulders. "I wonder when we reach the point where dignity becomes truly universal, where respect isn't contingent on status or connection or achievement, but extended as a basic human right." Dominic considered this, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm not sure we ever reach that point completely, but we can move closer to it through both institutional change and individual awareness." What happened at Horizon is just one small step in that direction. The car turned onto the tree-lined approach to Central Park West, where spring had painted the landscape in vibrant greens and delicate blossoms. In the distance, a plane ascended into the clear blue sky, a Horizon Airways flight beginning its journey to some distant destination. The changes they had implemented weren't perfect. There were still instances of discrimination, still moments when service differed based on appearance or assumption. But now those instances were being measured, addressed, and corrected. The invisible was becoming visible, the tacit explicit, the accepted challenged. It was a beginning, not an ending, not a solution, but a commitment to the ongoing work of creating a world where dignity was not a privilege to be earned, but a right to be expected. A world where their son might one day board a plane, enter a restaurant, walk into a meeting, and be seen first and foremost as a human being worthy of respect. As they arrived home, James awakened with perfect timing, his small face lighting up at the sight of familiar surroundings. Dominic lifted him gently from the car seat, the tender care with which he handled their son a reflection of the protective instinct that had fueled his response to Zoe's mistreatment a year earlier. In the elevator ascending to their penthouse, James reached toward the illuminated buttons with innocent delight. His gesture held no preconceptions, no judgment, just pure curiosity about the world and its possibilities. "That's what gives me hope," Zoe said softly, watching their son. "His generation might do better than ours, see more clearly, build more equitable systems if we do our part to clear the path." Thank you for watching this powerful story about dignity, respect, and the power of speaking up against injustice. If this video touched you, please hit the like button to help spread this important message to others who need to hear it. The journey toward a more equitable world requires all of us to acknowledge when something is wrong and take action to make it right. By subscribing to our channel, you'll join a community committed to sharing stories that matter and conversations that create change. Remember that even small actions can create powerful ripples. Share this video with someone who might need this reminder that dignity is not conditional. It's a fundamental human right that belongs to everyone, regardless of appearance, background, or status.